Although weather clouds is thick enough, we are going to see some drizzle, a few showers cropping up over the next few days. But generally, it is going to stay fine with the high pressure in control. But the feed is coming down from the north. It means towards the south of higher ground is the better chance of seeing those brighter skies developing, particularly as we make our way through the afternoon. There's a freshness to these breezes as they come in from that northerly direction. But further south with the sunshine, we're still looking at highs of a warm 20 degrees. Later on, as we head through the later part of this afternoon into this evening, the cloud is thickening. Where the cloud is thick enough, some drizzle, some light and patchy rain. For the most part, it's staying dry, and with that cloud cover, temperatures holding up overnight at around 13 or 14 degrees. It's another mild start as we make our way into tomorrow morning. For tomorrow, the setup stays the same, still plenty of cloud around. It is thinning, it's breaking as we make our way into the afternoon, but still thick enough to introduce a few spots of rain here and there. Temperatures, again, like today, at around 19 or 20 degrees. Through the next few days, those cloud amounts are going to vary. More in the way of sunshine towards the end of the week, temperatures picking up to highs of a warm 23.
ITV weather, sponsored by the Grande Rona R290 heat pump.
Hi, I'm Sean Wallace, the TV quizzer. I take on challenges every day, but my biggest challenge, my weight. But now I've lost 2 stone with Jane Plan. I tried doing it on my own, but always failed. But Jane Plan makes it easy.
Jane Plan is a weight loss plan delivering your calorie-controlled meals to your door. And there's nutritionist support. There's 28 breakfasts, 28 lunches, 28 snacks, there's even chocolate, and 28 delicious dinners, like lasagna. With Jane Plan, there's over 80 meals to choose from. All you have to do is heat and eat. On top of that, it's from just £2.70 a meal. So if you want to lose weight, go straight to janeplan.com or call us now on 0800 612 6844.
Having lost 2 stone in weight and 5 inches off my waist, the meals were delicious and I love the convenience of having them delivered to my home.
I never knew losing weight would be this easy. I'm 2 stone 4 pounds down. I'm even looking forward to wearing bikini this summer. I never thought I'd see that again.
Jane Plan has changed my life. I lost 3 stone in just 6 months. Plus, it's less than my weekly shop. Yes, less than my weekly shop. Go straight to janeplan.com. It's from just £2.70 a meal.
With Jane Plan, I didn't need to live on lettuce leaves. It's proper food with the calories counted for me, designed by nutritionists. And it tastes delicious too. Now I'm 2 stone lighter. My clothes feel more comfortable. I feel more energised, active and healthier. Outsmarting the competition is what I do. Outsmarting my weight, that's down to Jane Plan.
So if you want to lose weight and feel great, go straight to janeplan.com. It's from just £2.70 a meal. Or call us now on 0800 612 6844. That's janeplan.com.
We head to the studio now for an ITV News special.
Good morning from Downing Street and welcome to this ITV News special programme on the day power shifts once again in the building behind me and indeed for the country as a whole. In the next few minutes, Sir Keir Starmer will step out from behind this most famous of doors and address the nation, trying one last time to account for his achievements in his short 2 years in office. You can see many of his friends and supporters in the street here behind me, people who've been on the journey with him, no doubt. It will be a very emotional few minutes for them, not to say Sir Keir and his family. Then, in a well-rehearsed chain of events, he was the 4th Prime Minister in 5 years after all, Sir Keir will travel to Buckingham Palace to resign formally before his successor, Andy Burnham, quickly follows for his meeting with the King, where he'll be asked to form the next government. Then, to complete the procedural circle, he'll be back here addressing the television cameras before entering number 10, a place of work and indeed a home he has coveted for so long. We'll bring you those speeches and the constitutional moments, and I'll be guiding you through what it all means for us. Expertly supported here in Downing Street, of course, by our political editor Robert Peston and ITV News election analyst Professor Jane Green of Nuffield College, Oxford. Royal editor Chris Shipp will be at the Palace, plus we'll have reporters in Westminster and in Manchester, where the new number 10 North, of course, will be. Robert, let's not rehearse how many times we've been here in recent years. You know, it's sunny, it's a new morning, it's a new dawn for the Labour Party once again. One thing we've talked about a lot is the early mistakes that Keir Starmer made. For example, you know, cutting winter fuel payments and so on. I noticed Andy Burnham has started to be a little bit more specific in the last day or so about he really wants to focus potentially on cutting people's energy bills, potentially on cutting the amount of tax people at the very bottom of the income curve pay. What do you think will be his first steps? Do you get any sense of it?
Well, certainly, unlike Keir Starmer, he has taken lessons from Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, his predecessors as Labour Prime Ministers, and is building a story and preparing people for the kind of changes he wants to push through. And the consistent theme since it became clear that he was going to be Prime Minister was he wants to cut the cost of living. And I wouldn't be at all surprised, actually, in his very short address, without a lectern, we understand, breaking all precedent, but without a lectern a bit later on today, if we don't get a news announcement related to the cost of living. And if I had to bet what it would be, but this is a bet, but simply based on the kind of briefings
at this stage.
Simply based on the kind of briefings we've been having, I suspect he'll say in his first budget, he will increase the tax-free allowance that is attributable to all but the very highest earners on income tax, which would be...
It's been frozen for 5 years.
It's been frozen for 5 years, and it would be an immediate boost to the take-home pay of very, millions and millions of people. But I mean, I do know for a fact that there will be some kind of announcement, and that will be, as I say, my hunch. I think the significant difference will presumably be that he will just be a lot more positive and optimistic about the outlook for Britain. He put out some trail of what he's going to say today, and he's not going to shy away from the fact that Britain faces enormous challenges. But it would be a big mistake to repeat the very serious error that Keir Starmer made when he entered office, which was not just to announce some policies that took money away, particularly from people perceived to be more vulnerable, the elderly, by withdrawing universal entitlement to the winter fuel credit. But he was also, along with the Chancellor, who's just behind you, waiting outside for Keir Starmer to emerge, they were relentlessly gloomy about Britain. They kept talking about, how terrible things were, the poisonous legacy of the Tories, and it undermined consumer confidence and it undermined the confidence of business. And they set for weeks and weeks and weeks the expectations that the first budget would be incredibly painful. The taxes did, in fact, go up something like £40 billion in total. But it meant that those early months were really, as I say, characterised by people not investing, not spending, the economy, really in the doldrums. The challenge for Burnham is, despite the fact that many of those structural challenges we face are still there, very high levels of debt, he's got to persuade people that he has a plan to make everybody better off.
It's a big day. We'll be here all day, as you would probably guess. It's a sunny day. It's a nice temperature here in Downing Street, which almost never happens, by the way. And there are lots of reasons, to think the country may be a little bit optimistic at this point. Jane, we've got no way, of course, of knowing how millions of people in the electorate are thinking. But you spend a lot of time studying what they think and the shifts in opinion and all the rest of it. It could be that if one's guessing, people are thinking, oh, well, let's give this guy a chance. It also could be, God, this is really irritating. They're changing the leader again. Where do you think the electorate really, and we always talk about how volatile voters are. Where do you think the electorate really is? How much of a honeymoon is he going to get? How short is it going to be?
So the context is that volatility and also a profound loss of trust in politics and in politicians over recent years. And that's one of the reasons, I'm sure we'll talk about other reasons, that Keir Starmer has struggled so much. It's also one of the reasons that Andy Burnham has a huge challenge ahead of him and why he's taking that more positive tone. But I think Robert talked about the cost of living. The primary, there's maybe a few things, right? There's a primary concern about worries about money, people's finances. So I think there'll be a sense of a little bit of like, are things going to get better? We hope so last time, but it's pretty dire. And I think there's that sense that we really need something to change. So we definitely see that worries about finances, financial worries are the kind of primary concern in the electorate. So I'd imagine people are thinking about that. And then there's the question on the left. The whole reason we're here is, of course, because Labour MPs were looking down the kind of barrel of an election and thinking that Nigel Farage could win a general election. And so I think progressive voters on the left, are going to be hoping, because Andy Burnham has had a greater, electoral success in the Northwest, that he really can stem that tide of losses. And then I think there's frankly all of the things that you were saying, Tom, about, oh my gosh, what on earth's going on, not another one. But also that sense of people not engaging with politics, that loss of trust means that for many people, frankly, this is going to be, well, let's just wait and see. And the first time they'll really find out about Andy Burnham will probably be when they think about voting in a general election some years down the line. I was talking to someone yesterday, it's just an anecdote, of course, and she just didn't know this was happening. And I think it's just, for me, that's a really important reality check, that not everybody is obsessing about this. But I think, there's the confusion, a lack of understanding about why this is happening, why we're having so many prime ministers, but fundamentally, people's worries about their finances, and that's the big factor here.
Sorry, I'm smiling because when about a year after David Cameron became Prime Minister, someone came up with the idea at the Tory conference that we should go and do a little focus group at the local hair salon. And the first quote we got was from this young woman. She was like, so what do you think of David Cameron as Prime Minister? And she was like,
David who?
Who's David Cameron?
Who? Right.
And I just thought, she's a really smart woman, but she just was not that interested. It's like, I'm zoning it out, don't bother me with it.
This is not about, this is not about ignorance, right? This is just people living their normal lives. And it's not being relevant, but it's relevant to them when they feel worse off, when they're worried about their bills, when they don't see things getting better. So that's really relevant. Can I run my hair salon effectively, and so on and so forth. And that is precisely the problem, right? So since Keir Starmer came into power in 2024, people haven't seen things getting better. They've seen, if anything, that continuation and things getting worse. That affects people's lives, and then come a general election, people can pay more attention to who to pick.
Okay, well, one of the things Robert and I will be talking about a lot later is who's in and who's out of the cabinet. Obviously, big decisions. You can see, as Robert was saying, Rachel Reeves and David Lammy, just literally to the left of the door there, as you're looking at an air of expectation here as we wait for Keir Starmer to come out and account for his 2 years in power. Somebody else who's waiting and possibly watching these scenes in Downing Street is, of course, the King, and our royal editor, Chris Shipp, is at Buckingham Palace. I mean, Chris, we so famously don't get any insight of what the King or the Queen before him thought, but you can't have imagined that he'd be on another Prime Minister, can he, at this point?
No, you're right, Tom. Remarkable to think that you've got a king whose reign has spanned just under 4 years, and this is Prime Minister number 4 for King Charles. Of course, Liz Truss was in charge very briefly when the king ascended to the throne. He has just arrived behind me inside the palace. The sovereign's flag went up. He landed by helicopter at Kensington Palace a short while ago. He's been in Highgrove for the weekend. He's got an engagement this afternoon, which he's sticking to, of course he would, in Cambridgeshire. So he's kind of diverting to Buckingham Palace to do the hello and the goodbyes with various prime ministers today. And that process that he has got used to and we've all got used to over the past few years, because there's been so many of them. You're right to say we don't know what the king thinks. One thing we do know is that he takes his constitutional duty very seriously indeed, and upmost among those is inviting someone like a new Prime Minister, like it will be Andy Burnham today, and asking him, does he have the confidence of the House of Commons in order to form a government in His Majesty's name? I'm sure Andy Burnham will tell him, yes, I do, and that's the point at which he will be appointed Prime Minister by the King. One interesting point, Tom, because of the summer opening of the palace, this is happening, of course, in July, they can't use the grand entrance inside the quad behind me. So both Keir Starmer on his way out and Andy Burnham on his way in will use what's called the luggage door. So the bags are going out and in again this afternoon, and we expect it all to happen within the next hour.
Chris, one quick thing I wanted to ask you. Obviously, we don't know what the King says to the Prime Minister on these occasions. That's the whole point of it. We do sometimes, much later, find out how much value Prime Ministers have taken out of their meetings. Mostly talking about the Queen, of course, after she died. One thing that did occur to me is that the King, I would say, probably objectively is quite popular now, but if he's had periods of his life where he really wasn't. The one thing he does have is vast experience of the ebbs and flows of public opinion. You know, that can come and go. You can be popular, less popular, and then popular again. I'm imagining that for Keir Starmer, he's been potentially quite a shoulder to not cry on, maybe, but lean on, certainly. Do you think that's a fair assumption?
I think it is. One of the things about these weekly audiences that the King has with his or her Prime Minister, in the case of the late Queen, is that it remains private. It's one place that they can go and have a conversation and know that it's not going to leak. And of course, it is a very useful shoulder for any Prime Minister to chew things over. And Tom, you say the King hasn't been there for very long. Of course, he was Prince of Wales for a very long time. And he's spoken before about when I met Winston Churchill. There aren't many people who can say things like that. And he's been in public service for such a long time that he is able to offer that experience and take the long view. And it's something that, of course, politicians don't take long views very often. And you know, even by the best imagination, Andy Burnham might have, 2.5, 3 years of his premiership left to run before he has to call another election. So one thing that those who support constitutional monarchy, such as the one we have, is that the monarch can take a long view. Politicians are often very much more short-term and short-sighted when it comes to matters that affect the population and the country.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Well, as you come back to us here in Downing Street, you can see the crowd is still waiting. It's quite a big crowd as well, actually. It's still waiting for the Prime Minister to come out and tell us his final thoughts before he goes to resign to the King. Robert, what we have seen with Keir Starmer over these past weeks, really since he was ejected from power, is, perhaps not surprisingly, the same was true of Gordon Brown, wasn't it? More emotion than we ever really saw of him as Prime Minister. He's been quite raw, he's been appeared quite vulnerable at times, appeared very upset. Remember when he said he was standing down, Vic, his wife, you recall, was standing just to the left there, looked really absolutely shattered. What do you think is... OK, here we go, here is Keir Starmer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning. I'm about to visit His Majesty the King to offer my resignation and close the book on my time as Prime Minister. My work is done. In 6.5 years, I took our party from a historic defeat in 2019, changed it so it was fit to face the country, and won a landslide general election victory in 2024. Since then, it has been the privilege of my life to serve you and this great country as Prime Minister. And I am confident that Britain is now stronger and fairer than it was 2 years ago. Our economy is stronger. Our public services are on the up, with the biggest fall in waiting times for 17 years. Children are being lifted out of poverty every single day. Immigration is down significantly. Our defence and security are on a far stronger footing, and our international reputation is greatly enhanced. Yet the thing I will always take away with me, the most humbling aspect of this job, is the front row seat you get to witness the greatest things of this country in action. To see every day immeasurable acts of resolve, grit, decency and compassion from people who serve our country whether that's in their regimental colours, NHS scrubs, or simply the millions of people in their communities who volunteer their time and their effort to the ground beneath their feet. We face a world now where our enemies will stop at nothing to divide us because of our values, our freedom, our decency, and frankly, because of our unflinching resolve towards the brave people of Ukraine. And so under this attack, it is vital that we remember the greatness of the Britain all around us, that while we debate how to fix our problems, there is something we inherit from our country and our character that can give us confidence, that we can change our country for the better, that we can create a Britain where every child can go as far as their talent will take them, and we can unite different people under our common flag if we don't succumb to that division. So, as I now pass the baton to Andy Burnham, I wish him every success. He has my full support. And finally, I want to thank once again my family, Vic and our children, my team, all the staff here and across the Labour Party, everyone at Number 10 and across the civil service, and everyone who has supported our efforts along the way. For all the focus on individuals, politics will always be a team sport, and the changes we've delivered for our country and our party belong to everyone who has fought for them. I thank them again today, and I thank the British people for the opportunity to serve. I go with good grace, I go with a smile, and I go proud of everything that we have achieved. Thank you very much.
Although we have it, a short and I think it has to be said dignified speech from Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, watched by his wife Vic, who has to such a great degree been a rock for him to lean on, a stalwart at his side, whatever phrases you want to use. She has been right there with him as his greatest supporter. Many other supporters in the street, as Robert and I were talking about earlier. Rachel Reeves there, he hugged her immediately after the speech. David Lammy also there, and numerous others. Possibly one of the best speeches I think we've seen Keir Starmer give. Graceful, dignified, emotional, but not cracking with emotion. And now he is on the way after his short premiership, despite that massive majority, to offer his resignation to the King before the King announces or asks for Andy Burnham so that he can ask him to form the next government. The Prime Minister even being really, I think it's fair to say, pretty dignified about his successor. Robert, thoughts on that? I mean, I thought that was possibly the best speech I've seen Keir Starmer give. I did find myself wondering if the Labour Party is going to regret ditching him, but maybe it's a bit late for that conversation.
Well, you were making the point just before he came out that I think we have seen a sort of more authentic Keir Starmer since he was effectively forced out of office by Andy Burnham, because he showed, what he was feeling. And I think one of the reasons, one of the things that, as we've discussed before, that I did find sort of puzzling but also incredibly striking is talking to Labour MPs about what their voters think about Keir Starmer, and then talking to voters themselves. The dislike of Keir Starmer in recent months has been extreme. In many ways more unpopular than a politician like Jeremy Corbyn, who totally divided the country. And I've been wrestling with this idea, what is it about Keir Starmer that meant that on the doorsteps when Labour MPs were campaigning, they just got this relentlessly negative message back about Starmer as Prime Minister. And a lot of it is about trust. We did a focus group in Makerfield, ITV, and what came back from both Labour supporters and indeed Reform supporters was they just didn't trust him. And I think that is something about the way he presented. Now, it is also true that they say, well, he promised lots of things, then he then U-turned, and there have been lots of U-turns. But there was also something about his presentational style. And what has been quite striking, and as you say, we saw it here, that was sort of the Keir Starmer that I've seen many times in private. He, was weirdly more relaxed, and simple and honest.
We're watching the Prime Minister's car pull it into the gates of Buckingham Palace just there before. Chris described the process earlier, but he's now really only a minute or two from ending his premiership as he goes to see the King and formally tenders his resignation, obviously for the constitutional reason that he can no longer command a support of a majority in Parliament. Andy Burnham can. Those are the basic mechanics of our constitution. So the King will ask Andy Burnham to form the next government. Jane, as we watch Keir Starmer and Vic, his wife, walk in to the palace, when Robert was talking today, it really reminded me of Gordon Brown's departure. When we saw him with his family and everyone said, oh, why couldn't we have seen that Gordon before, the human Gordon, the emotional Gordon and all the rest of it. What did you make of that speech and the Keir Starmer we saw there, and actually what Robert was saying about how annoyed people were with him?
So I think one of the things that we see in these moments is a bit of writing of history.
Yeah.
Talking about the landslide election victory, I know that's something, or I hear that's something that Keir Starmer has claimed credit for many times, which I think we could discuss and debate. Talking also about having a smile on his face, wanting to kind of be remembered as not going out with sour grapes. So there's a bit of writing of history. And I think, one of the things that tends to happen is we're quite forgiving of people when they have finished doing the things we don't like.
Yeah.
So obviously, many leaders
very British.
After the fact, they do seem more human, of course, because they are being more honest and they're being more natural. And I guess there's a bit of that kind of psychology in us as well.
Can I just jump in on that just for a moment, because I've been wanting to ask you this for ages. One could say at this point, well, why wasn't he more like that when he was Prime Minister? Why wasn't he just more honest about things? Why didn't he just say, oh yeah, I messed that up, that was terrible, I'm really sorry, I won't do it again? Or is that just a kind of politics that unravels because the electorate get even more annoyed?
Well, I think, it's really difficult to admit that you've made a mistake in politics, isn't it? And this is one of the problems we have, is that people kind of wriggle around on the television because they can't give a straight answer. And that kind of breaks down that kind of sense of authenticity that people want so desperately. And we'll wait to see whether Andy Burnham, who has, I think, managed to be much more direct and much more honest and much more human in his style, whether he can actually translate that in government when he's responsible for those different decisions. But I think, going back to what Robert was saying about Keir Starmer, there has been this puzzle pretty much from pretty early on, from around sort of October, November, December in 2024. Why is this man so unliked? And I think, you know, part of it is his style, and part of it was also U-turns and not quite knowing where he stood. And there is obviously, and his, you know, very notoriously, a lack of political vision. He didn't come in prepared to govern. And that was very evident from a very early stage. But I think there has been something more profound going on too. So people also take their judgments of leaders from parties. You know, they sort of look at the whole thing. And I think people had started to look at Labour and the Tories and think, well, maybe we just need a wholesale rejection of this system, of these kind of the parties we've already known. And now we're going to look to insurgents, we're going to look to new parties. We want a different style of politics. So it was deeper than just about him as an individual, and also deeper, I think, than just about his policies. That's a big, you know, that's a big thing. But there has, I think, been this kind of pivotal moment that we saw in the May local elections earlier this year, which was, you know, should we just sort of get rid of these two traditional parties altogether? And that rubs off on a leader. You know, there's something deeper going on. And we're in this environment, and have been for a very long time, where hardly anyone is popular. When we're not talking, we don't even expect someone to be really popular, like kind of Blair was in his early days. Politics and politicians are highly divisive. People think Nigel Farage is popular. Well, no, he's popular within a certain segment, and he's very unpopular within another segment. Yeah. So we're not, you know, I mean, it would be kind of weird to see somebody be super popular unless some terrible event happened, and then we sort of rally behind them.
Okay, Chris is still at Buckingham Palace. Chris, we've talked with Robert and Jane there a bit about the politics, but also, as we've also talked about, this is just a sort of profoundly human moment. We've seen a sort of more human Keir Starmer, in fact, in general, over the last few weeks, but again here today, giving a sort of short, dignified, I think even his enemies would concede, graceful speech. For the King, I mean, I guess I'm intrigued to know how he handles a day like this. He's got a Prime Minister who's been booted out of power after only 2 years. It's humiliating, it's upsetting. This is probably a pretty emotional day for Keir Starmer. There's a massive human factor, is there not? Yeah, there's the politics and there's the constitution and the way that works, and the King has the role that he has. But there's also sort of two human beings who've got to know each other pretty well, seeing each other. How do you think the King handles this moment?
Well, you know, Tom, I think when you see each other every week, as the Prime Minister and the King do, you do obviously build up a certain relationship. And as for what's happening today, and I think, Tom, I'm guessing here, of course, but around about now is probably the point at which Keir Starmer is handing his resignation to King Charles and ending his premiership right about now. So it is a key moment. We just saw Keir Starmer get out of the car. He was met by the King's equerry and also the most senior courtier here, Sir Clive Alderton, as they went through that luggage door I was telling you about earlier. As someone who will know a lot about what's going on right now, because it is, as you say, Tom, a very private meeting between two individuals, constitutional historian Anna Whitelock. Anna, in terms of what the King does, it doesn't come much more constitutionally important than appointing a Prime Minister and accepting the resignation of the other one.
Absolutely. These are the residue royal prerogative powers, so the powers that the King still has in a constitutional monarchy to appoint a Prime Minister, and so he's accepting the resignation of his Prime Minister, and therefore that government is now terminated, and Andy Burnham will soon be here to assure the King that he has the confidence of the Commons to form an administration.
You use the word terminated there. I mean, the King's always got to have a Prime Minister, but I suppose in reality there is about an hour between one Prime Minister saying, sorry, I'm off, and out the door, and by the way, we don't see Keir Starmer again, do we? He goes out a side entrance. You don't actually see, it saves him the embarrassment of being filmed leaving the palace. And until Andy Burnham arrives, the King's effectively, is he not without a Prime Minister?
Well, in many ways, yes. I mean, perhaps this is the most powerful time for
he could do a few things in that 1 hour.
He could do a few things. But yeah, I mean, this is obviously a relationship that's evolved over a couple of years. And I think the two have been, have a meeting of minds on lots of issues. Of course, the King has gone on a lot of overseas visits at the request of his government, particularly, of course, to Canada, to America. He supported the government in their support of Ukraine, hosting President Zelensky at key moments. And I think perhaps, summing up the way in which Starmer has perhaps used the power of the king was that letter that he proffered to Trump in those early days.
There were a couple of points. There was the letter, wasn't there, at the beginning, but also then the speech. I mean, we were in Washington watching the king deliver that speech when he literally took down Donald Trump, section by section, and yet that was the king doing what the Prime Minister asked of him. Please go to America and please actually just keep this relationship alive, notwithstanding some of the tricky points that we've got going on at the moment.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it has been a strategic partnership between the king and Starmer that's worked to both of their advantage. I mean, I think many people would say that the king has performed a really important diplomatic role over the last couple of years, and clearly Starmer has very much asked him to do that. So I would expect the king will be keen to carry on that kind of role under Andy Burnham.
A very kind of private meeting this, isn't it? And Tom was just saying about two individuals on a human level. You've probably got the king feeling a bit sorry for Keir Starmer being booted out of office. But of course, he was the king when Liz Truss was booted out of office, and he had to welcome in Rishi Sunak. So he's got a little bit of experience of this, not as much as his mother had, of course, but he's got a bit of experience.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, he's on to his fourth Prime Minister now in 3 years or so. His mother had 15 Prime Ministers in 70 years. So, I mean, at this kind of pace, the king is going to be surpassing his mother. But yeah, I mean, Liz Truss's premiership was just a couple of days old when Charles became king. And I think it's also important to say, I mean, we don't know, of course, what goes on in those audiences, although Prime Ministers of the past have always talked about it being a time to unburden themselves. And the late Queen at one point talked about being a sponge where she could kind of absorb the problems of the Prime Ministers.
And didn't Harold Wilson once say it was the only meeting he ever had that didn't leak?
Exactly. And indeed, David Cameron actually talked about that when Charles was Prince, they had sort of practice audiences with his government. And he talked about what a great listener he was, what great questions he asked, and how wise he was in his advice and counsel. So that gives us a sense, perhaps, of what Charles has been to Starmer over these very choppy few years and months.
Of course, the king being the king, this is just something he squeezed into the middle of his day. He's still got an appointment, an engagement in Cambridgeshire this afternoon. And I noted how Keir Starmer's car had to weave through changing the guard. And the crowds that are here at the moment, and we spoke to a few of them before, they were here for changing the guard. They weren't quite sure that there was a prime ministerial changeover going. No. So they're not here to see the politicians, they're here to see the men in red tunics.
Exactly. Well, the men in red tunics were playing Living on a Prayer as Starmer arrived, which just stopped as Starmer arrived, and then there was applause. So whether that was for Living on a Prayer or the outgoing Prime Minister Starmer, we're not sure. But yeah, lots of people around are saying, what on earth is going on, not realising that there's a change in premiership. And of course, people are hanging around, which certainly will be welcome sight for Andy Burnham.
And just we don't obviously know what goes on in the room. What's in terms of the kissing the hand, not kissing the hand? Do you just shake the hand now? I mean, have we modernised the process, or are we still kissing hands?
The court circular and the statement from the palace will talk about a kissing of hands taking place between Burnham and the king when Burnham formally accepts the role of Prime Minister. But in fact, it will be a shake of the hands. The kissing of hands dates back to the 18th century to Robert Walpole, but now we don't kiss hands. I mean, that of course was a sign of ultimate subservience and loyalty to the monarch, but now it is a shake of a hand when that moment has been agreed.
We're looking at pictures just then of Buckingham Palace. That meeting will end, and then I think the family are going to be invited in. Interestingly, Keir Starmer's wife, but also Lady Starmer, but also their two children, who they've kept very much out of the public eye, but they do get to say their farewells to the King before, of course, he invites Andy Burnham and his wife after him in for an audience as well. So it's, I mean, I hate to call it a family occasion, but it kind of is in a way, isn't it?
I mean, it is. I mean, I think, we can lose sight of that this is a family who moved in to Downing Street, two teenage children.
And moved out, according to the trucks at the weekend.
Well, exactly, moved out. I think by Starmer's own account, his kids weren't particularly keen to move into Downing Street, so it's been a pretty hard couple of years. They've been doing GCSEs, I think, or A-levels over the last few weeks. Now they're being moved out, and I suppose this is a moment where, Keir Starmer is saying, come on, kids, you might as well come and meet the King.
Come with me to the palace and get some tea.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there's a lot that we can't say, but we do know that Andy Burnham is going to come. He's going to say to the King, I do have the confidence of the House of Commons in order to form a government, because that's essentially the King's job, to make sure that exists.
Yeah, I mean, for all, perhaps that Andy Burnham's sort of informality, he can't really make this moment informal. I don't know whether the guards will start going to play Oasis or something, but actually it's a very formal moment. And I think also reality will hit Burnham when his car sweeps into the palace. He has that moment with the King, and of course when he returns to Downing Street he's going to be asked to do that very solemn job, which is to sign those letters in the event of a nuclear attack. So I think the moment becomes very, very real very quickly for Andy Burnham.
Not a black t-shirt and jacket kind of moment today.
I don't think so today,
Much more formal. So Tom, we're looking at pictures there you can see of the Queen Victoria monument, a lot happening inside the palace, but what we expect to see next, of course, is the arrival of the incoming Prime Minister. He'll still be just plain old Andy Burnham at that point, but for his appointment with the King, I'm a few years out of date, and then we'll have our new Prime Minister.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. Yes, as Chris says, we're looking at the feed from the helicopter that news crews have put up above the Buckingham Palace and indeed the House of Commons in order to film the Prime Minister going on that short journey from Downing Street through Horse Guards down the Mall and to the Palace. Andy Burnham shortly will arrive, as Chris said. We'll then see the reverse journey as he comes to the place he's long wanted to be working from and living in, number 10 Downing Street. Not the easiest place to live, the flat above number 11, I imagine, where he will live. Maybe Robert knows the answer to that. I mean, David Cameron moved in with his family to the flat actually above number 11 rather than number 10, which is rather bigger and rather nicer. Do we know what Andy Burnham's plans are? Last I heard, his family was potentially going to spend some time in Manchester rather than necessarily moving in here, but is it going to be a whole...
I don't think we know definitively. What we do know is that Burnham himself will divide his time between here, Westminster, Downing Street and Manchester. And he will spend 2 or 3 days every week, we are led to understood, at this new Downing Street of the North when it is seriously up and running. Now, you've got to assume that his wife will be here in Downing Street some of the time, but whether ultimately she and the family decide that it is their proper home, we don't know yet. Of course, there are complicated security implications of all of this. One of the things one has to be aware of is that when you take on this role, you become an exposed person for the rest of your life. They're going to have security for the rest of their life. It is expensive, and so if they are essentially living in 2 locations, that will also, frankly, make the security both more problematic and a bit more expensive.
Well, as you can see, if you're watching at home, the lectern has indeed disappeared. We're told that Sir Keir Starmer has now formally resigned, so his premiership, short as it was, has ended. The King is about, obviously, to ask Andy Burnham in a few minutes' time to be the next Prime Minister. He will come in. He has already said he will not be speaking from a lectern, which I want to assume means he will be speaking without notes, a la David Cameron and Ed Miliband before him, though even they spoke from memory for...
I'm quite intrigued by what the microphone arrangements will be. Will he be holding a microphone in sort of rock star fashion?
Karaoke, no, I presume he'll have a lip mic. But I mean, David Cameron obviously famously spoke at conference without notes in whatever year that was, 2005, and Ed Miliband then, tried to pull off the same trick. I mean, does it make any difference speaking out? Jane, what do you think? What do you make of the style thing and the whole "I'm not going to wear a suit" thing? Is that irritating to people, or is that like, fair enough?
He is going to wear a suit, by the way.
Is he? Well, he's over the past, but generally he says he's not going to wear a suit unless he has to. Or people are just like, oh, whatever.
I think, on a more serious note...
On a more serious? What could be more serious?
Note, what's interesting is Andy Burnham understands the symbolic in politics.
Right.
And, what we've talked about is Keir Starmer, quite technocratic, very focused on details, as we understand, but without that sense of vision. And I think what he's talking about...
We must have had enough of, do you put the tea bag or the milk in first, in terms of the symbolic elements of politics. Surely we've got to get on to politics.
Symbolic politics, number 10 North.
Is there anything more important than that?
Fundamentally, right, what this is doing is saying, I represent you, and it's not just about London and political elites and that place in Westminster that you feel disconnected from, but it's a sense that I represent you, and you might be living in the Northwest or wherever, right? And that isn't about the mic business and the, the T-shirt, right? But it's saying, I am doing things differently. And I'd imagine that's what's really going on here. He's trying to reinforce the fact that he wants to do politics differently. And yes, it's a very small thing, whether you do, I'd be absolutely petrified. I'd forget every third word if I were doing it without notes. But, some people can do it, and great. If he can do it, then fantastic, But the point is that we're talking about Andy Burnham as different. We're talking about Number 10 North as different. And that is, I think, hugely significant and symbolic.
Sorry to interrupt you, but do you
terms.
think voters think, I think everyone probably thinks having devolution and devolution of power is good. And if the Number 10 North thing is real, then great. I think almost everyone would think that. There is, of course, the danger that these things are just gimmicks. What do you think voters are thinking at this point? Like, great idea.
If you think historically over the last 5 to 10 years, right, what we've seen, British election study data that we've been collecting for 12 years now, is that sense that people perceive that their area isn't well represented, and people think the economy is going badly in their area, but they think London is better off. Now, London's a very complex city, of course, it's got huge diversity within it. But that sense, I think, that, the various parts of the country have been neglected, forgotten about, they haven't enjoyed the same kind of growth. Now, obviously...
and you're right, that's been the big driver of the fragmentation of our politics. The fact, and that Brexit vote. I mean, the interesting thing for me is precisely, how you framed it. Many would say that Boris Johnson got the problem, but then simply didn't deliver when he talked about levelling up.
Yes,
right?
he talked
Burnham's rhetoric is another reworking of the idea that policy has to be about narrowing that gap, income, wealth, expectations between the rest of the country and London. But it is, as you say, all about can he deliver in the way that, for example, Boris Johnson simply didn't.
I want to go and talk to Rachel about the Number 10 in the North in a minute, who's in Manchester. But just before, there's been something I've been meaning to ask you for ages. We've talked so much over the last few years on News at 10, on programmes like this, on our podcast, about how extraordinarily irritating it is when politicians can't say what they think. You sit and watch an interview and you're like, man, just say it. Just say something you actually believe. And, there's the word salading that goes on and on and on. Do you think Andy Burnham can find it? We've seen a bit of it, but it's more difficult as Prime Minister. Do you, having seen a million Prime Ministers, do you think, he's going to be able to talk bluntly to the electorate?
So there are multiple aspects of this, and certainly, the thing that you've hit upon, I think, is vital, which is when people come up to me in the street, almost, by a wide margin, the thing that they say more than anything else is, how do you put up with these politicians? They never answer the question, right? And that is one of the reasons, I'm sure Jane would agree, why trust in politicians has fallen and is continuing to fall. That people think, they don't, we talked about politicians, the public not trusting Starmer. Broadly, they don't trust any of them, right? Because they've run away from providing the information about what they really think. Now, Burnham certainly does that thing that Farage does and Trump does, is coming across as more authentic. Now, whether that in practice means that he will start taking risks and saying things that could easily be characterised by the media as gaffes, we'll see. But almost as important as how he performs, for me, is whether he really does follow through on what he's been saying, which is he will not punish members of his own party who disagree with him. He wants to encourage debate. And, what I would dearly love to see, and I don't just say that because, I host the Peston Show, which is on tonight. In a
very fine show.
It's not just that I want people to come on to basically say what's on their mind. It is also that for politics, for confidence in the way we run this place, we've got to get back to a situation where politicians as far as they can, say what they think.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Let's go to the statement from Buckingham Palace. Let's inject a little bit of formality into these somewhat informal proceedings. Sir Keir Starmer, it says, MP, had an audience of the King this morning and tendered his resignation as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, which His Majesty was graciously pleased to accept. Lady Starmer was also received by the King. Not the longest statement in the history of the world, or indeed of the palace, but it is what it is, and it said what happened, and there we have it. Now, our North of England correspondent, Rachel Townsend, is in Manchester. We've been talking about the number 10 North, Andy Burnham's emphasis really right from the start on devolution, on shifting power away from Downing Street. We have, of course, heard these things before, maybe not with as much conviction and passion as Andy Burnham. Rachel, what do you make of the reality of that? Of course, for it to actually mean anything, it's got to be more than just talk, hasn't it?
It's got to be more than just talk, and I think people want to see something tangible, and perhaps that is behind his idea of having an actual building here. This is number 10, the North. You are now part of the power sharing, perhaps. You know, that is idea. As Robert said, we don't really know what departments will be from there. It may be that functions come from there rather than departments. I think for Andy Burnham, it is about reducing bureaucracy and increasing efficiency. And, you know, let's be brutally honest here, the topic of devolution is not really a turn on for people. It doesn't excite people. I think what will excite the electorate is the idea of having more power, more control. You know, we've heard that phrase in recent years, haven't we, about taking back control. And I think that does galvanise people. This is, for Andy Burnham at least, about freeing local authorities, local towns, cities across the UK from the shackles of central government. He doesn't believe there is always a national solution to local problems. And, you know, we know, don't we, that the problems here in Greater Manchester may be very different to the problems in Norfolk, in the Highlands of Scotland, in the southwest. And so this isn't about just transferring the Manchester model. It's about giving authorities the powers to spend the money on the things they choose to, and structuring their own councils the way they choose to. And as I say, those problems will be different, but let's focus in on what he has done in Greater Manchester, because there are tangible examples here. People talk lots about the buses, don't they? And in that Bean network, what he did was he involved local residents in fares, discussions on timetables, on routes. He made routes more accessible for those on apprenticeships. Fares were reduced for those who work part-time. They are little steps, but they make big differences to the everyday lives of people. And I think that is what is important. And during his time as Greater Manchester Mayor, what was absolutely key is that everybody he involved wanted to improve Greater Manchester. And so he started a social partnership where universities, civic institutions, trade unions and businesses, they all work together, because the key for Andy Burnham, I think, is addressing the productivity crisis in the UK. And if he's going to do that, then he needs cities like Manchester, across the country, other cities and towns to thrive. And I think that is where his focus is, and that is what is behind his idea of number 10 in the North. And he cites his own example, doesn't he? When he left Cambridge University, he returned to the Northwest. He simply couldn't get any work here. He ended up working for free on a local newspaper, and that has very largely shaped his politics. He says that nobody should have to leave their hometown or city in order to get on in life. Tom.
Okay, Rachel, thank you very much indeed. Well, we are now in the interregnum, so to speak, not between kings, clearly, because there is never an interregnum on that front. Once a monarch dies, his or her successor becomes king or queen immediately. That, of course, does not happen under our constitution with prime ministers. There is a little moment between when the prime minister has just tendered his resignation. We see him seeing the king here and doing that until Andy Burnham goes in and the king invites him to form a new government. We do not technically right this minute have a prime minister, but we shortly will do. I want to come to Jane and pick up on some of what Robert was saying there. let's not beat around the bush. This has been a pretty weird process. We elected Keir Starmer with a huge majority. We as a country, I use in the broadest sense.
Yeah.
We're only 2 years on from that.
Yeah.
And his party, without consulting us, booted him out. Andy Burnham has been sort of treated as the Messiah, sort of out of nowhere a bit. I know that's not true. He's been most people think he's done a pretty good job in Manchester, and he was a Secretary of State in various departments and all the rest of it, including health. So he's not a newbie. I'm not trying to imply that, but the whole Messiah thing has taken some of us who've been around politics a long time a bit by surprise. I put it like that. And here he is, no contest, nothing, in Downing Street.
Yeah.
I've just been away on holiday for 2 weeks, and I was thinking about it a lot when I was away. And I was thinking, is the public going to be, you know what, give the guy a chance, let's see? Or is the public more in a mood of, you better be good, because this is annoying? Is there any way of deciding, or maybe a bit of both? Where do you think voters are?
So one of the kind of pieces of evidence that I saw about polling about Andy Burnham was that, there was more positive than negative, but primarily there was lots of people that don't know yet.
Yeah.
And so the primary kind of, the biggest factor, if you like, is we don't know who this man is. If you're not in the Northwest, we've just heard about him recently. What's he going to do? He's been very light on policy detail, which means that people have, reasonably no clue what is now going to change. And I think, the primary kind of sense is, well, who is he and what's he going to do? So it's impossible to say, well, people are annoyed by this, or, some people clearly will be, of course, and some people won't be. But I think it's that broader sense that people just don't really know what they're getting. So he has to put flesh on the bones very quickly. And what tends to happen is that periods of, early in a period of office, there's interest again, right? So we take a bit of interest in these individuals. There might be a little bit of a honeymoon, and he has to then give content in probably the first 90 days, around 100 days, to give a really clear sense of what he is about. And after that point, we're much more likely to either stop paying attention for a while or to start to judge things negatively. And so we see time and time again, people come into power, they start with the honeymoon. Keir Starmer didn't really enjoy one. And then that support declines steadily over time. So, I suspect there'll be plenty of people who are kind of, okay, who is this guy? What's he going to do? And then we'll see and judge him on his performance.
I wanted to just pick up on one thing. Sorry to labour the point, but I was thinking the other day about, do you remember when Rachel Reeves's budget, when she called us all, called all of you in and said, because she was going to say she was going to break her manifesto promises, and then she didn't say anything, and then she didn't do it. And we've so often talked about this business of, I don't know whether it's just irritating to us, but I suspect it's very irritating to voters too. It's like inability to just say things as they are. And you went down a very interesting road earlier. Like, do you think Burnham can get away with that as Prime Minister is really what I want to ask you. Do you think we can have a Prime Minister who, when something goes wrong, can say, yeah, sorry, got that wrong, it's really terrible, won't be doing that again? Or do you think the whole media melts down and the public get even more annoyed?
Well, Trump shows that you can change your mind 1,000 times on the biggest issues and somehow keep going, and he definitely hasn't, in a sense, characterised himself as a lame duck. Look, there are degrees of mistake, there are degrees of U-turn, and in general, I believe that the public will give you more of the benefit of the doubt if you are in general more honest with them about the challenges that the country faces, and then try and have a proper debate about how we fix it. One of the things that I think Keir Starmer got wrong was that people didn't have a sense of direction, both in the big sense. The biggest challenge this country faces is to revive an economy that has been stagnating since 2008, It's been a big challenge for all governments. Since then, they've all flunked it. But also on important stuff that is narrower. So take the winter fuel, not take the winter fuel allowance, although that was one example of a very embarrassing U-turn for him. Take the abolition of the 2-child limit on universal credit. Early in his parliament, when members of the soft left and left, among his MPs said that should be a priority, they were thrown out of the Parliamentary Labour Party. They were exiled, they were punished. Only a matter of months later, Keir Starmer does abolish the 2-child limit and is now claiming it as one of the great achievements of his time in office. And there are various other examples of that level of change of position that people just find not only confusing, but they think, well, who on earth are you? All right? And so what Andy Burnham has to do, and it is something that both Brown and Blair were brilliant at, was, I hate this cliche, take the country on a journey. Right, over a period
of weeks. We love a journey.
But broadly, it does capture an important point, which is set out the problem, put out some ideas of a consistent, coherent sort about what might fix it, and then, ultimately, a few weeks and months later, when you announce what may well turn out to be quite a complicated thing, right? Quite in normal circumstances, unpopular thing, you get away with it. I mean, the classic case of this, as you'll remember, was when, having said in the first general election of New Labour in '97 they weren't going to put up income tax. In the second general election, they did put up national insurance to pay for the health service, and that was something that was widely regarded at the time as enormously popular because over weeks and months they'd built a consensus for it.
Okay, one of the things that incoming Prime Minister Andy Burnham, who will be Prime Minister very shortly once he turns up at the palace to be invited to by the King, one of the things he said he's going to change, as Robert was alluding to there, is the way politics itself works. Less whipping in Parliament, allowing MPs to dissent. And all I would say to that is, well, let's see, because that can get very complicated. But Harry is at Westminster today, and apart from anything else, Harry spent a lot of time looking at what Andy Burnham might do differently. I mean, Harry, do you spend a lot of your time in there in the lobby dealing with MPs? You have a view on whether encouraging MPs to be more themselves is a good thing or not?
Well, certainly, I think there is a recognition from Andy Burnham that Labour MPs have felt very disconnected from Keir Starmer's government and increasingly disconnected over the past 18 months or so. So Andy Burnham has sort of identified that as an issue, talked about changing the whipping system as a way to try and ensure that Labour MPs don't feel as detached as they did towards the end of Keir Starmer's premiership. And we saw, of course, big rebellions on things like welfare, for example, that showed that there just wasn't the connection between Downing Street's operation and the Parliamentary Labour Party that there perhaps should have been. I was speaking to Andy Burnham last week, got to spend a few minutes with him, and look, he talks about trying to be a very different sort of Prime Minister, and part of his hope about trying to do that is by spending, as Robert was saying, probably 2 or 3 days in Greater Manchester in the north of England and around the country away from this place. He also was telling me that he hopes he can keep his season ticket at Everton Football Club, a club that he supported all his life. He hopes he can not just keep his season ticket there and keep on going to games, but he can sit in the same seats among the fans, not have to move to one of the boxes. So he hopes that will keep him grounded and, in a way, keep him sort of separate from Westminster in a way that he has been over the past 10 years. And part of the reason he thinks that he's more popular than other politicians is because he is slightly detached from Westminster. And certainly his reputation over the past decade as Mayor of Greater Manchester has been enhanced because of some of the things that he's campaigned on. I mean, most famously, when those COVID lockdowns were imposed on Greater Manchester, he sort of railed against Boris Johnson and what he thought he was trying to impose. Last week in the House of Commons, his first speech since returning to Westminster as an MP was about the Hillsborough Law, something he's campaigned on for the past decade, and he spoke very passionately about that. But when I asked him last week, just briefly, about what his plans were for government, he was slightly less convincing in his answer, seemed slightly less confident, and I think that's the challenge for Andy Burnham. He does feel very comfortable, very confident as a campaigner, as an outsider looking into Westminster, but I'm not quite clear yet how he'll cope when he sort of becomes establishment, when he becomes Prime Minister and all the levers are within his control. Will he still be as effective a communicator as he has been over the past decade when he's been outside Westminster?
Harry, what do you make of the mood of the party? Over the weekend, I was reading a lot of the kind of long write-throughs in various places of, newspapers and so on and so forth. Lots of kind of long write-ups of the incoming Burnham administration and arguments and debates about who would do what where. And a lot of it was sort of, written by good hacks, reporting people obviously off the record saying, oh my God, this isn't going well, it's a disaster before it's even started. And I just found myself sitting at the breakfast table, rolling my eyes, oh, I can't, can we face any more of this? I mean, people do moan. That's what MPs do a lot of the time. God bless them. They do a lot of moaning. You know that, I know that, Robert knows that, Jane knows that. What do you make, though, realistically, of the mood in the party today? Pretty optimistic? Bit nervous?
Yeah, I think all of that. I think there is definitely some optimism about Andy Burnham. I think there always is when a new Prime Minister comes in, and there's certainly hope that he can be a better communicator for some of the changes that many Labour MPs think have been quite good under Keir Starmer's government. But there's a lot of uncertainty as well. Lots of Labour MPs over the past few weeks have been meeting Andy Burnham for the first time. So, they don't have any sort of deep personal connection with him. There is a lot of uncertainty about what sort of Prime Minister he might be, and I think there's a bit of nervousness about whether this could all unravel in the next few months in a way that we've seen before when parties have changed Prime Minister. But for now, look, lots of Labour MPs I've spoken to, they're certainly going to give him the time to try and show that he can be a different sort of Prime Minister to Keir Starmer.
OK, Harry, thank you very much indeed. We're looking at the courtyard of the palace there. Is this Andy Burnham arriving? I'm asking this question of myself. It looks like it is Andy Burnham arriving, about to get out of the car, possibly, to be going in to the palace for the first time as the incoming Prime Minister. That is very much Andy Burnham with his wife in a suit and tie. He said he's not going to be wearing a suit and tie a lot of the time. I think that's Clive Alderton, the King's Private Secretary, saying hello to them both and taking them in. Chris, here we are. This is the moment, the incoming Prime Minister going in with his wife. I've just had to put my glasses on to see. That is the King's Private Secretary on the right-hand side, isn't it? Ushering them in. OK, we haven't got Chris.
That is right, Tom. Yeah, that is Sir Clive Alderton, the King's Private Secretary, as he meets the incoming Prime Minister. Still, we should point out, at that moment, not Prime Minister until he goes up the stairs and meets the King in one of the private rooms, and it's that point at which Andy Burnham will be Prime Minister Burnham and the fourth Prime Minister of King Charles's reign. With me still, the constitutional historian Anna Whitelock. Anna, I mean, it's quite brutal, isn't it? We just saw Keir Starmer do exactly the same thing, arrive next to the luggage door, as we now know it's called, and get out, get greeted by the King's Private Secretary and ushered in. Just, less than an hour later, someone else is doing it again, and that little period, that interregnum of not having a Prime Minister is about to be over. Absolutely. I mean, for that moment, all power was held by the King, and now, as you say, Andy Burnham's arrived, a long journey from Manchester, final steps now down the Mall and into greet the King.
I mean, big moments. But as you say, for one family, it's the end, packing it up from Downing Street. We don't see Starmer leave. That was a private moment. And then literally minutes later, it's all eyes on Andy Burnham.
We do know Keir Starmer has left, though. We've had that confirmed from the palace. So whatever exit he used was one where there are no cameras, and that's afforded to every outgoing Prime Minister. But he's on his way, and the new broom is on his way in.
Yeah, one in, one out. But I think it's striking. I mean, there's people gathered here, but in many ways to have seen the changing of the guard. And as we've been here, lots of people have been saying, you know, what's going on, and there is a sense that this is just a transfer of power. You know, we haven't had a general election. There hasn't been great presentations and speeches from Burnham, so it does almost feel a bit under the radar. And as he swept in here, obviously, life changed massively for Burnham, but certainly around here.
I'm not sure many of the people actually noticed. Interestingly, that he came down the Mall, whereas Keir Starmer sort of came around the sort of back route down through Horse Guards, didn't he? But the crowds here, a lot of them, as you were saying, have said to us, when we say, oh, there's a new Prime Minister, the response we're getting is, oh, another one.
Yes.
And you can see why they're saying it.
Yeah, I mean, not another one, or repeatedly being asked, well, you know, what's going on? And then we would say, well, there's a new Prime Minister. Oh, okay, what, now, today? And there is a bit of a sense almost like we didn't know about that. And, obviously, a lot of those people are perhaps tourists and so on. But such has been the speed of Andy Burnham's ascent, in many ways behind public gaze, that I think today is very memorable for Burnham, but for everybody else, another change of Prime Minister.
Yeah, there is a sense here. I mean, you can tell that the people are here for the changing the guard and actually seeing Buckingham Palace, less so for the sort of comings and goings of Prime Ministers. We're just looking at some pictures of Andy Burnham arriving with his wife there. There's the King's Private Secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, also the King's equerry as they go through the door and into Buckingham Palace. Talk us through what happens, because as we were saying earlier, it's important the King always has a Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister forms His Majesty's government, and he's got to ask Andy Burnham whether or not he has the confidence of the House of Commons, which clearly we think he did, given how many Labour MPs supported him.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, of course, a constitutional monarchy, so, essentially power doesn't reside in practice with the monarch. It's now
apart from that last hour.
Well, exactly. Goodness knows what might have been happening.
Things, yeah.
Exactly. But of course, it's delegated to his Prime Minister. So yes, he will be asking Andy Burnham whether he has the confidence of the Commons. And I think, as you say, he can say a resounding yes. And he will then be invited to form an administration, His Majesty's government. And then the kissing of hands will happen. As we were talking about before, it won't actually be a kiss, it will be a handshake. But to mark a kind of degree of loyalty and subservience to the King, even though, of course, political power really now has shifted and resides with the Prime Minister.
In a way, it's also proving the point today, because you'll know that we had recently, when we had the annual accounts came out, and it was confirmed that the King isn't going to reside at Buckingham Palace, and actually King William V, when the time comes, is going to stay in Windsor. But they told us as much as they could that this is still HQ of the monarchy. This is still where the big stuff happens.
Yeah.
And the big stuff is certainly happening today.
Yeah, I mean, these are the moments really that we associate with Buckingham Palace. We've been here quite a lot. Of course, the Royal Standard is up. Indeed, when the King was kind of in the vicinity, having landed in his helicopter, the flag went up. So I think now Buckingham Palace HQ sort of embraces when the King is in London.
Which is kind of proving the point that Palace aides were telling us at the time, which it doesn't matter where the King resides, in other words, where he puts his head on the pillow at night. Actually, this is the HQ, and even though they spend all that money, the 369 million on refurbishing it, he won't be living there. He will just be the function of monarchy and how we go about things like, for today, welcoming a new Prime Minister.
Absolutely, and obviously state visits, this is the main focus. And of course there, we have the balcony. We haven't had a balcony moment for a few years now. Of course, it was the infamous sort of platinum jubilee image of the Queen not long before she died, there with her son and grandson and great-grandson, the line of succession.
Showing the continuity.
Exactly.
Now, we were talking just a few moments before we came on air about how many prime ministers the king had. This is number 4. His late mother had 15, but I think you were working out, if we go at this kind of rate, the king's going to have like 15 in about sort of 9-10 years.
Yeah, I mean, we were anticipating, obviously, the general election in 2.5 years, there could be a new prime minister. So on average, we'd be looking at a prime minister every sort of year and a half.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, he could surpass his mother's 15 prime ministers, before we know where we are, which is quite remarkable because, of course, many people would have said for the late Queen, she had so many prime ministers. Well, here's looking at Charles.
He's on number 4 already. And a reminder, actually, that because we don't have a presidency, our parliamentary system is such that you can change prime ministers when you haven't had an election, as long as that prime minister or the leader of the party, of the biggest party in the House of Commons, and he's got the confidence of the House of Commons.
Yeah, the really key moments that we've seen today or are taking place today are the formal resignation of Starmer. Of course, he resigned a few weeks ago, but that wasn't official. He was still Prime Minister until today, when he formally tendered his resignation to the King, who accepted it. And as you said, we had that sort of moment where there was no Prime Minister, and now inside Buckingham Palace behind us, the King will be asking Andy Burnham to form an administration. And I imagine there will be now some sort of chit-chat about what's happening. I mean, Gordon Brown described how on his first meeting with the King, he sort of talked about the amount of work that he had to do. And I'm sure that will be the sort of conversation that Andy Burnham and the King will be talking about now.
And we know the King likes his work and he continues his work this afternoon. He's got a job in Cambridgeshire. He's come here from Highgrove this morning. So this is just a sort of small part of his day, isn't it, to sort of welcome the new Prime Minister and set him on his way. Then, of course, attention turns to the other palace, the Palace of Westminster. Anna, thank you very much indeed. So Andy Burnham in there at the moment, probably about now, Tom, we think he is accepting the King's invitation to become Prime Minister, after which there'll be a more or less formal meeting between the King, Mr Starmer and his wife, and then they'll be heading your way in the cars and back up towards you, Tom, in a few moments' time.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed. By my calculation, Andy Burnham's been in there more than 10 minutes, so not that's particularly surprising, but clearly they are chatting about something, presumably, at least in part, the challenges that they face. Robert, I just wanted to come to you about one thing that Harry mentioned, which I actually had not picked up on before. This idea that Andy Burnham has an aspiration to sit in his normal season ticket seat at Everton. Now, Keir Starmer was an Arsenal...
It's funny you should pick up on that, because I too...
I thought, well, that's
if
never
you remember, we did
almost
an entire podcast on poor old Keir Starmer sort of being humiliated because, he's as much a passionate Arsenal supporter as Burnham is an Everton supporter. He, particularly because his son is also a passionate supporter, he was desperate to have some semblance of normal family life by going to the Arsenal, but he was told that the security arrangements for allowing him to sit in his normal season tickets were just way too expensive, that they'd have to effectively pay for another 10 seats for sort of security officers. And in the end, therefore, he was put in this invidious position of essentially having to get gifts from the Arsenal of very expensive seats in, either the director's box or a private box, which, of course, in the early phase of his time in office was sort of humiliating for him because it looked as though he was taking freebies. And so, but Burnham apparently, according to Harry, and it'd be interesting to find, is somehow, deciding that he can sit in the Everton. Keep his season tickets. But the security costs of that will be significant. They will be significant.
But not to interrupt you, but I don't know, obviously, how Everton's season tickets work, but I imagine he's likely surrounded with his season by other season ticket holders who aren't going to give up their seats to PPOs or anyone else. So, I mean, if he really thinks he's going to do that, that is quite intriguing. I don't think we've ever seen a Prime Minister literally sitting around a crowd of...
I don't know how much discretion a Prime Minister has to say, I'm sorry, I don't think I need the security on this occasion. And, maybe he can just say to his protection officers, see you after the game. I'd be very surprised You know, Andy Burnham's nearest and dearest may well be advising him not to do that. And indeed, to be clear, Everton Football Club, I mean, they will have really expensive insurance. Whether they can give him permission to do that, I slightly doubt.
Well, Jane, I mean, I just put this to you, really, because I don't want to labour the point.
It's not a football question, Tom.
So I was thinking about the Everton team of the 1970s and what you're feeling about the Everton team today. No, I don't want to labour the point, to the point of being boring about it. But what's kind of intrigued me about it is that this is a guy. He says he's only going to wear a suit when he absolutely has to. He doesn't normally wear a suit, so he's not going to wear a suit typically in the course of a day's work. He is clearly projecting himself as, I guess, undoubtedly who he is as somebody who, views himself to abuse that old cliche, a man of the people. But that's got to mesh with the reality as we've just been talking about. I don't know. Do you think voters care? Would they be impressed if he said, "Yeah, I'm going to sit in my season ticket, come what may," or would they just think you're an idiot?
I think, Tom, I'm just really struck that here we are today, with all of this kind of moment. In 3 or 4 months' time, we're not going to be talking about this. We're going to be talking about, maybe Everton fans are.
I'm still going to have questions about Everton for you in 3 months'
But we're not going to be talking about this. The crucial thing, really, isn't it, is that in all of these kind of symbolic gestures about change and who is Andy Burnham, and he's going to try and be more authentic and try and be a man of the people, and there will be issues with that. But what really matters is whether he can build political capital, whether he can get people behind him, whether he can bring some of that competence, reputation, delivery, a sense that he cared about people's concerns on cost of living, bus network and all the rest of it in Manchester. That has worked in Manchester, very different context. Can he do that right across the UK? And, yes, it's helpful if he's sort of someone that you wouldn't mind listening to on the telly, but this is going to be beside the point very, very quickly. And very quickly it's going to matter what's changing.
And just picking up on what Jane is saying, can he do what he's promised to do, which is to drive down the cost of housing, of energy, of transport, take water into public ownership?
I'm just going to keep going, but I just want to very briefly interrupt and say, of course, this is the moment, well, it's probably not the moment he was asked to be Prime Minister, because it's the moment of introduction to the King, but it's the handshake, not the kissing of hands, as Anna and Chris were talking about. We don't do that anymore. Handshake shortly followed.
It's a very odd photo. Don't you think? There's a sort of way in which
isn't it?
The King is slightly recoiling, it seems to me. It is a slightly odd.
Anyway, let's not overread that. It is the moment they met, and presumably shortly afterwards, the King asked him to be Prime Minister, and we'll get the statement shortly.
But if I could just finish off this thought, which is, one of the very big things that Andy Burnham's already talked about, which is he, wants to drive down the cost of what he sees, his advisors see as some of the big elements in the surging cost of living, which is, undermined living standards in this country. And I say housing, energy, water, transport. The question is, can he do that in a way that doesn't increase public borrowing in an unsustainable and rather terrifying way? Because he may be different as a communicator, he may be different as a personality, but he inherits just the same structural problems that poor old Keir Starmer had, which is, national debt on most people's measure, 100% of our national income, spending an enormous amount, well over 100 billion a year, on servicing that debt, the interest bill. Not a lot of spare money, right? And that is we'll be talking later on about who's going to be his Chancellor, but the challenges for the new Chancellor, in my view, by far the most important appointment he'll make, are not trivial.
Okay, to recap, we believe Andy Burnham is now officially our new Prime Minister, having been asked to be so by the King. We've seen the picture of the two of them together a short time ago. We haven't got the statement from Buckingham Palace, but we do believe that that has happened. We are here in Downing Street waiting for the new Prime Minister to come back from the Palace to give us some sense in his first comments of what his priorities are going to be, all the rest of it. As we've already observed, he's going to be speaking without a lectern and therefore, one assumes, without notes as he comes out and addresses the world media. Worth saying, I mean, Robert and I have been here, as we've said a gazillion times, in only the last few years. We've also, of course, been here over 4 decades, the pair of us. I actually don't think I can recall ever seeing so many of the world's media here. It's an absolutely vast scrum. Also, just off camera, which you can't see, are all of Andy Burnham's supporters. Earlier in the day, we saw Sir Keir Starmer come out, give a short, I think it's fair to say, graceful and dignified speech, watched by some of his closest supporters, including the likes of Rachel Reeves and Davy Lammy, and of course his wife Vic. Then he left for the palace, and all his supporters flooded out of Downing Street. And we now have Andy Burnham supporters waiting at the end of the road, literally to walk up past me, to assemble aside Downing Street. We're going to see Andy Burnham come back from the palace and then give his speech before going into Downing Street to begin the difficult process of government. Of course, one of the key questions is how MPs at Westminster are viewing all this, thinking about all this, and Harry Horton is there surrounded by people with no doubt many views, including the Mayor for West Yorkshire. Harry, over to you.
Yeah, well, we know that one of the big themes Andy Burnham wants to talk about is devolution, and one of the people who hopefully is set to benefit from that devolution is the West Yorkshire Mayor, Tracy Braben, who's with me now. Tracy, look, you've known Andy Burnham for a long time. He might be from the wrong side of the Pennines. What is it you hope that he will do differently to Keir Starmer?
Well, there's no doubt that today is a great day to be a mayor, for sure. But I do want to just pay tribute to Keir Starmer as well, because he led on that devolution revolution and really supported mayors. You may remember 3 days into becoming Prime Minister, he had us all down in number 10 to discuss what we wanted. He drove it through, and I also want to say Rachel Reeves was absolutely pivotal in starting the journey to fiscal devolution, which is something that mayors really want. But we are about to see the biggest, I think, transfer of power from the centre to the regions. And having worked with Andy Burnham, a colleague and a friend, I know that his approach, place over politics, is going to be what defines him.
And have you spoken to him in recent weeks about his plans? I mean, there's been lots of reporting he might spend 2 or 3 days a week up north. Has he told you if that's his plan?
Well, he's a man that is true to his word, and he said that's what he's going to do, and I do believe him. And I think number 10 North is really, really radical, because it is about where the power sits in the country. And I know that he's going to serve, as he said, not just the North, but he's going to serve the whole country from number 10 North as well as here in number 10. So I do believe, yes, that's true.
And we've heard previous Prime Ministers, I mean, Boris Johnson most famously talked about levelling up. That was a big part of his agenda, but I don't think anyone really felt it materialised. Mm-hmm. Why are you convinced this time will be any different?
Well, I can see it in West Yorkshire. I mean, devolution for us isn't a radical or a new idea. For 5 years, we are delivering better transport through the Weaver network that's underway, full devolution and full franchising by 28. We're going to deliver that tram, which is a city like Leeds, one of the biggest cities in Europe without a tram. All of the skills agenda, affordable houses, we're already delivering that. Just imagine that growth and that investment across the whole country.
People keep voting for change in politics. We've seen it kind of since 2016. We've seen people vote for Brexit. They've voted for Conservatives, voted for Labour on a mandate of change. Lots of people don't feel like they're getting that change. Do you think Andy Burnham can deliver change that people will feel in the next few years? I
have no doubt, because I think his focus on the cost of living, and particularly around utilities, that have just, the costs have spiralled away, and we the public have no control, and we can't hold them to account either. So I think his focus, which is whether that's water or energy or transport or housing, I think that's really radical, and I am really excited for the change that can deliver for the people across the country.
And is he ready to become part of the establishment, part of the Westminster elite?
I don't think he will. I mean, obviously he's been in politics for 25 years. I don't believe he's going to be in the dining rooms of Westminster when he can be around around the country, delivering change that I know people are desperate to see.
Okay, Tracy Rabin, thank you very
My
much.
pleasure,
One of the
Harry.
people who hope to benefit from Andy Burnham's devolution, and there'll be many other mayors up and down the country hoping they'll get extra powers in the coming weeks and months as well.
Okay, Harry, thank you very much indeed. Well, I know the suspense has been killing you, but Andy Burnham is indeed now our Prime Minister. Buckingham Palace has put out a statement saying that the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, was asked by the King to form a government and hands were kissed, though in reality we know that's a handshake. Now, Robert and I were debating earlier the essential questions of the day, such as how would Andy Burnham be mic'd up? And you can see there is no lectern, but there are some rather low microphone, so I'm interested to know how that's going to work in a sound sense to the world's media, who, as I've said, are gathered here. I wouldn't precisely say in their thousands, but definitely in their hundreds, more than ever before. And you're just going to, as we speak now, see coming up behind me all of Andy Burnham's supporters. Not all of them. I mean, I'm sure there are more supporters than there are here, but a lot of his closest supporters, people
working for him are now coming out of number 11. Kevin Lee, who's been his closest advisor as Mayor of Manchester. He's the man in the red T-shirt, if we've got a camera on him.
Yeah.
So
people who are going to be on the journey.
We're minutes
Continue
away.
the cliche. It's good. We're minutes away, okay, from Andy Burnham. Before we, Jane, one thing I want to ask you is, one of the reasons the Labour Party has swapped Prime Ministers is because they're terrified of Nigel Farage and reform. We've talked about this a million times. I haven't had a chance to chat to you much about all the trouble Nigel Farage has been in, donations, etc., etc. Is Andy Burnham potentially a bit of a lucky general here, in that he's taking over at a point where Nigel Farage is not having such a great time?
I think so. I think he's like just thinking about the politics. It's not just Nigel Farage that's had difficulties. Zach Polanski hasn't had as good a few months as he did before. And actually, Labour's vote was hemorrhaging left more than it was going to the right. And interestingly, in a poll that asked people kind of how would you vote normally, you know, like what's your vote intention, and then a poll with Andy Burnham, there were two really interesting things. Obviously, it's hypothetical, so we don't know what's really going to happen. One was that Labour did a bit better under Andy Burnham and might have edged over reform just very slightly, but the other was that the Tories did slightly better in that poll. And I think, you know, what's absolutely fundamentally crucial here for Nigel Farage is, you know, can the Conservatives be a mainstream party on the centre-right that absorbs some of their voters back from reform? And that is more likely, of course, when all of the stories over and over and over are going to be either ridicule because of Count Binface and the Clacton by-election, but much more seriously about money in politics and about, you know, all of that, you know, and here is somebody who had made so much play from being somebody that kind of could connect and could understand people's grievances, who had been picking up more support amongst people that feel financially insecure, those older voters who did so, and actually now sort of looking like he's betraying those principles. Now, if it's a Labour Party under Andy Burnham versus a slightly more popular Conservative Party, not perhaps because Kenny Badenoch is doing anything massively clear to win those voters back, but with reform support plummeting potentially further, then he is indeed extremely lucky. Now, luck is a big thing in politics. Keir Starmer, I think, was very lucky to win the majority that he did in 2024. Can't necessarily claim a lot of personal credit for that. That doesn't matter, because if Andy Burnham comes in and there's a poll bounce, whether that be because of him or whether that be because of Nigel Farage, it really doesn't matter. It builds that kind of sense of political capital that Labour MPs are dying to see. If he can start to shift the polls in a more positive direction, that buys him leeway and latitude to do some of the difficult things he's nevertheless going to have to do.
Okay, well, as you've probably sensed, there's something of a carnival atmosphere here. We always have this with an incoming administration. Those with long memories will remember some of the big moments. Tony Blair arriving in Downing Street on the morning of 1997, surrounded by ecstatic supporters. New Prime Ministers always come in on a wave of enthusiasm. Their supporters in the street excited to see them here at the heart of power. And it ends as it did with Keir Starmer this morning, invariably really, with them leaving feeling rather less good about themselves, and certainly the country feeling less good about them. But It's a beautiful day here. As I said at the start of this programme, if you've been watching it all, it is either usually freezing cold or boiling hot in Downing Street. It's such the right temperature today. Maybe another reason why Andy Burnham is a lucky general.
He certainly is a lucky Prime Minister. This is literally the best weather we've ever had for one of these.
Who was it? It was raining.
Rishi Sunak.
Pouring for Rishi Sunak.
Oh. Awful.
Wasn't it pouring for Liz Truss as well? My memory fails.
Anyway, sorry, there's a wonderful metaphor here. So Steve Rotherham, who is the mayor of Liverpool, is literally holding a baby.
Okay.
Who is his great friend.
Yes, of course.
So I think this metaphor of,
you couldn't
carrying the baby seems to sum
make
up
that
the
up.
trepidation.
Was it Steve Rotherham who was talking about wealth taxes, or have I misremembered that a couple of days ago?
The point is that Andy Burnham himself has not formally ruled out a wealth tax. He has said that he wishes his early measures to be measures that unite the nation, and some would say, when he was asked about the wealth tax, that's what he said. And so he wasn't saying, never a wealth tax. He was just saying that wouldn't be his initial priority. And although Labour MPs, many of them are very much in favour of a wealth tax, there are massive practical problems, probably the most important one of which is, in the end, if you look around the world, wealth taxes don't tend to raise that much money, and they are more about symbolism than making a really big difference to the public finances.
Well, listen, we don't want to get too heavily into policy at the moment, because if you're watching this is sort of all about really the atmosphere at this point. Andy Burnham's about to arrive. We're going to get the sense of how, I guess, in a way, Jane, this is a really the atmosphere might be quite light and all the rest of it. This is a pretty critical moment, because you mentioned earlier when we were discussing how a lot of the country is who's Andy Burnham? Tell me, or they're like, the changing Prime Minister, I didn't know that. A lot of people have zoned it all out, and I often find there's just so many people who are intelligent, best summed up with intelligent, but just not that damn interested. It's like, whatever.
And it's quite rational.
Yeah, quite rational, really. But they'll probably be watching this, right? New Prime Minister, there probably will be a bit of, okay, let's give this guy a chance. So these are actually quite critical first minutes for him.
Yeah, they're really important first minutes, and it, although it is, it's amazing to be here. It's really fascinating. There is this huge sense of excitement. Clearly, the rubber hits the road when the door gets shut, and
reality.
Everything,
bang.
Reality, bang. And I think, of course, it's for those people who are really into politics, those people on the left of politics, they are hugely hopeful now. And it's kind of worth remembering, that politics is it's a big deal, it's incredibly important. And so these major events, elections normally when we see a change of power, but obviously not in this instance, are hugely hopeful moments for people, and for many in the public as well. They'll tune in briefly, try and make sense of what's going on, and then of course get on with their daily lives. But if you're on the left of politics today, you've spent the last 2 years seeing a relatively unpopular Labour government, but with a massive majority, but a very historically unpopular government for a government governing alone on 34% of the vote. Just seeing their support just disappear, halving. Some of the most dreadful polling the Labour Party has ever seen in a sustained way. The fragmentation of our politics, a huge kind of sense that people don't know where to turn to, looking for parties that would massively change the status quo. This is a really, really important moment, because it could be, it might not be, but it could be, for those people on the left, the moment where things go back to relative stability and normality in politics if Labour is a party that can coalesce votes on the left, and we'll see what happens about votes on the right. But for many people on the left of politics right now, this is it, and it is a last chance in a way, because this isn't going to happen, barring something completely bizarre that I can't foresee, again before a general election. And if Labour can't do it
Jane,
now...
that's a big prediction.
I think it's
this is it till the general election? I'm not so sure about that. Well, no, I'm sure you're right. Listen, one of the things I was thinking as we're waiting for this is it's just the I suppose the drama, the intense drama of this moment. And what I mean by that is, Andy Burnham is not a novice to Whitehall and Westminster. It would be totally wrong to say that. He was, he was Secretary of State for Health before. He was Secretary of State for Media. He has traipsed up this street and into that building numerous times under Blair and Brown. But we all, if you're wondering what happens today, think back to Love Actually, when Hugh Grant walks in and his new chief of staff is there and he introduces him to all the staff and all the rest of it. I know that was a bit pastiche, but the fundamental facts of the matter are, yes, he'll have some of his own people inside that door, but he is walking in this door as Prime Minister, and he is going to be hit really hard, Robert, as you were saying moments ago, immediately with all these really, really difficult challenges that did for his private. Now, he might think he's reasonably prepared, but he's got to make sure that he's consistent in the decisions he's taking, that he's, really thought through the impact. It's really hard.
But it's more than that, right? Yeah. I mean, obviously, his MPs and, much of the country want him to have a coherent, practical plan to revive our prosperity. But then there is something else really important. When I talk to prime ministers, both in office and when they've left, they say, nothing prepares you for the shock of just the stuff that comes in from all sides. You may have a plan to revive the economy, but within seconds, you will be hearing something about what Trump's doing in Iran, or, some crisis in social care in some part of the country. It all comes on your desk immediately. Very soon after he arrived, he will be given that briefing about the nuclear codes, because he is now the person who is in charge of our nuclear deterrent. He gets amazingly stressful briefings from the security services about the risks we face. Yes, he has wanted this job pretty much, as far as one can tell, his entire conscious life, and he's run twice and failed to be leader of the Labour Party. Third time without a contest, lucky. He will think he has had an apprenticeship. He will think that he is prepared, but he'll get in there, and there will definitely be a big eek. Oh my God, what have I let myself in for?
Well, we're watching the courtyard at Buckingham Palace, and looking by my watch, Andy Burnham's been in there 40 minutes. That's a chunky and fairly decent first.
They're obviously having a beer, man down the pub, Andy Burnham is sharing a beer with the Prime Minister.
Inviting the King to come and watch him watch Everton play in the season ticket seat next to him, which wouldn't we love to see that? Anyway, we think he'll be out in a minute. As you were talking, Robert, there, I was thinking about, I can't remember which election it was, probably 2010 maybe, or 2015. No, 2015, because Cameron was Prime Minister. I remember doing a Tonight documentary, and I went to do some filming with David Cameron at 5 in the morning, or 5:15, or whenever he got up in Downing Street here in the flat to start working on his red boxes. And I remember he said to me, the thing about red boxes is that basically you can send your red box is full of decisions, and they range from security to a bypass on the M3 or whatever it is that's got lots of local opposition. And he said you can always send the briefing back with I need more information, but he said if you do that, the whole of Whitehall jams out. He said the Prime Minister's job is to make decisions all day, every day.
And it's worse than that, because the only decisions that come to the Prime Minister are the ones that are just too difficult for Cabinet.
Okay.
So they get, I'm not going to use a rude word, but, at this time of the day, but they get what we like call the difficult decisions.
Okay, we'll save that for your show later. Here he is, Prime Minister Andy Burnham, shaking hands with Clive Alton, the King's Private Secretary, his wife alongside him, and they're about to get in the car, return to Downing Street, where there is, all around us here, a very expectant crowd. Now, there's cheering. I imagine that is from beyond. They're in the courtyard there, so there must be people looking in from the gates, from outside the palace, beyond the gates. It's a very short journey. We'll have the top view from the helicopter as he now drives back to the palace. Chris, I don't know how long we expected that meeting to be, but 40 minutes seems, that's more than a perfunctory chat, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom. I think they were in there for a lot longer than we thought. I can just hear the motorbikes revving up behind me, which presumably means he's on his way. Yep, I can just see him going through the north centre gate now with his cars. And he went in at about 3 minutes past 12. He's out at what, 40 minutes past 12. So yeah, just shy of 40 minutes, Tom. Which surprises us. Maybe the King had a few things he wanted to get off his chest. Maybe he gave him a list of things he wants him to do in government. But they're just going past me now around the Queen Victoria Memorial and then up the Mall. In the front car there, the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, and his wife, Marie Frances Van Heel. And they've done that part of the job, the meeting of the King. As the Buckingham Palace put it, they kissed hands upon appointment. And as you discussed earlier, Tom, it doesn't actually do that, but it's just the old-fashioned phrase that we still use. And now he's making his way from one palace to your palace of Westminster and into Downing Street. A big moment for Andy Burnham as he sits in that car preparing to give the speech without lectern that you're about to listen to.
The palace isn't really going to give us any idea of what was said, is it? But do you get any sort of context at all as to what the King would be discussing or trying to get across to the Prime Minister, or are they literally just chit-chatting on the sunshine and the time of day?
Well, I was listening to your conversation about sunshine earlier, Tom, and we're all grateful for the lack of rain, although the umbrellas we're using here in Buckingham Palace are to shield us from the sunshine. But yes, in terms of what they spoke about, look, I think these men need to start off having a new relationship. They've got a big relationship to come, and whilst he had a pre-existing relationship with Keir Starmer, he doesn't really have one with Andy Burnham, former Health Secretary. Probably didn't see the King that much, apart from the odd Privy Council. So yeah, I think a long meeting probably shows that they have a lot to talk about, both his plans as Prime Minister, but I'm sure the King, as he's constitutionally allowed to do, to give some advice to his Prime Minister.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Well, the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, who has dreamed of this moment, I think his whole political life, and perhaps before he went into politics, is now on his way to walk in to number 10 Downing Street as the new Prime Minister. I mean, huge excitement for him, no doubt. However much you've been around politics, reporting on it for decades, there is still something quite extraordinary about watching someone go in to wield as much power as you get, as anyone has in this country, particularly when you know that the problems we face, the difficult choices he's going to have to make are really quite profound, and honestly did for his predecessor. I mean, we haven't really talked about it today, but just the question of defence. Keir Starmer, as he left, talked about enemies that seek to divide us, an obvious reference particularly to Russia, to some extent perhaps to Iran and China too. But as Robert was saying, these are the issues that the new Prime Minister will grapple with immediately as he comes in the door. Keir Starmer often talked about the danger that Russia proposed, but when it came to the defence investment plan, he, in the eyes of some people, including some of his military chiefs, was not doing enough to fund the increase in defence that he himself had outlined as being necessary. So that's a key decision that Andy Burnham is going to have to make. Does he agree with Keir Starmer? So far we believe he does, that the need to invest in defence is there, but how is he going to fund it? These are very, very difficult decisions that he's going to have to make very early. They're down the road a bit today. The gates are opening. The Prime Minister is about to arrive. A very expectant crowd. We imagine that the car will park up just here and he'll get out and walk up on foot. At least we hope that's what's going to happen, because otherwise they're going to run us over. But here he is. Let's just get out of the way and let you experience this moment. The new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, and his wife arriving to take power here in Downing Street.
Thank you. I have just come from Buckingham Palace, where I have accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government. In doing so, I am acutely conscious that I am the 6th person in the last 10 years to walk up this street, the 7th Prime Minister since 2016, making this a moment for reflection and new resolution. It requires my generation of politicians to raise our game and rise to the new challenge. Britain needs to show the world that we can regain our stability once again. And that is our challenge, to make politics work, to make it work better. I know people at home are fed up with politics. I hear you, and I want to be honest with you. We have not been good enough, and we need to be better. We will be. We will make this moment a circuit breaker for Britain, bringing forward the biggest changes in the last 40 years. A new political model and a new economic model. In the 1980s, Britain took some wrong turns. Political power was centralised, economic power privatised, large parts of the country deindustrialised, and they still haven't recovered. Many feel as though they're still in decline, and they don't have the ability to turn things around. And that's why we will change politics, to make it more collaborative, more about problem solving than point scoring. And we will take power out of here and carry it into every postcode in the land so that they can do more. And in doing more, build a new economy where we put life's essentials back under stronger public control to make them affordable to you again. Reindustrialising Britain, using public procurement to back British industry. Later this year, I will bring forward a new plan for Britain, a 10-year plan, laying out a path from where we are now to where I believe we all want Britain to be, wherever we're coming from, whatever party we support. But I can do something to give people some breathing space now, some help with the cost of living. And I will set out some of those measures starting tomorrow, including how we pay for them. We will help more young people into work by changing the education system and giving them more support, more mental health support. And we will build more council homes. That is the fair and sustainable way to bring the welfare bill down, to meet our fiscal rules and to honour our commitments on defence to our international partners. We will help people to live well, building a more preventative state, investing in people's success rather than paying for failure. And that work starts now. I will soon go through that door behind me and issue my first instruction to end rough sleeping in our country. It's about putting the right values and the right standards at the heart of government. I will put the care of people at the heart of everything I do. I will give this my all, and I ask you all to pull with me. Let's build a new national sense of unity, of common purpose and positivity. Let us make this the moment when Britain starts to believe again, the moment we bring back hope. Thank you very much, everybody.
Andy Burnham working his way along the line of his supporters here. They're still clapping. He's got to the end, pretty much outside number 11 Downing Street. Presumably he is going to come back and then walk through that famous door, number 10. I mean, hardened cynics as we are, I would say that was a pretty impressive first speech, delivered without notes, faultlessly. Clearly knew what he wanted to say, had thought it through, and delivered it with a degree of feeling. Tackled very early on. Here we go. Okay, a kiss for his wife and the Prime Minister. Robert and I, we have the images inside Downing Street we were talking about earlier, the Love Actually moment when the Prime Minister comes in, and to be welcomed by his own staff, of course, his long traveller, members of his staff, people who've been with him, supporters, but also the Downing Street staff, many of whom he won't necessarily know, and people who are going to be serving him in his role as Prime Minister. What a moment that was. The optimism of an incoming Prime Minister in sharp contrast to Keir Starmer and his wife Vic, who left earlier. And honestly, there were times in the last few months where it looked as if they'd been all but broken by the brutalities of that office. Andy Burnham, the very reverse today, going in on a wave of hope. His hope, certainly the hope of his supporters, to a degree his party, and perhaps even many people in the country who would like things to be different. Interesting that he addressed that right at the very start, straight off. He acknowledged what many people are feeling, their annoyance with politics, the sense that he started off by saying he was the 6th Prime Minister in a decade, and I thought, oh, you're missing one there, because we're only just over a decade for our 7th, but he said, no, this the 7th since 2016, clearly acknowledging, Robert, I thought. And what do you think of that speech? You know, we've all seen many of these speeches. Candidly, all cynicism aside, I thought that was pretty good. What did you think?
It had two important elements to it. One of which was he just recognised up front that the kind of instability we've seen in this country over the last 10 years. He talked about that we've had, well, 6 people, you know, coming up here, 7 prime ministers in 10 years, and actually way worse than that, right? 5 prime minister in just 4 years. It's why, actually, you know, a member of the cabinet, who may not be a member of the cabinet much longer, we find out about that later on, said to me, you know, only a few days ago, that he genuinely believed Burnham would not be the last prime minister of this Parliament.
Please stop talking like that. We can't take any more of it.
No, but I mean,
anyway,
the problem is, you know, some people see him as treacherous, as having basically forced out Starmer, and once people get the habit of treachery in that sense, very hard to put that back in the box, as it, or when MPs get the habit of treachery, as it were. But you know, he said, you know, absolutely explicitly, incredibly bad for the UK, this instability. We look like, you know, a joke to the rest of the world in that sense. So he has got to bring stability. But then I thought the other very significant thing is he wants to make a difference to people's lives immediately. Some people thought he would spend the summer working out what to do. He said in terms, tomorrow, he will announce fully costed measures to reduce the cost of living. Sounds like a mini budget, right? And he also said throughout the week there will be a series of announcements. And he started with a very symbolically important announcement. He said he's going inside and his first instruction will be to end, I mean, you know, we'll see whether he pulls it off. We've had promises like this before, but to end rough sleeping. That's what he said.
It's a very big ambition.
It's a big ambition, but I mean, obviously in terms of how he wants his administration to be seen, a symbolically powerful ambition. And he also said that he would be later on this year setting out a 10-year plan for the revival of the country, and he hopes that that 10-year plan will attract cross-party support. And, you know, we can assume, therefore, that that 10-year plan will be the document that shows us what he's going to do to put the funding of social care on a generous and sustainable footing. He's talked a great deal about the scandal of inadequate social care for the elderly. And he feels this very personally. I mean, I thought one of the most moving things that he has said over the last 24 hours is his dad, who suffers from Alzheimer's, is so unwell that he doesn't even know that his son is becoming Prime Minister, which is, you know, one of those family tragedies that so many families in this country live through and understand. And, you know, he wants to bring more humanity into social care and better funding. And then there is 2 other unbelievably thorny problems. One is, how do you reform welfare, including, and it's not just what much of the politics likes to focus on, which is the rising bill for those who are unwell and unable to work, but also, frankly, the rising cost of the state pension and reforming the guarantee for pensioners, the so-called triple lock. And then finally, and he did refer to this, but I must admit I didn't really understand what his proposal was to sort this. He did refer to Keir Starmer's predecessor's promise to increase spending on defence as a share of our national income from 2.6, 2.7% now to 3% in 2030 to 3.5% by 2035, which will cost billions, tens of billions of pounds. Very unclear. Well, you know, Keir Starmer couldn't find the money. It's a lot of money. He made reference to the fact he's got to find that money. So big ambitions. Some
detail.
Some. You know, he hopes attractive announcements for the electorate to reduce the cost of living in the next few days. But some big strategic challenges.
Okay, Jane. You have been in the street quite a few times. You've seen many a political speech. What did you make of that less on the sort of political analysis terms, more on just the human terms. Do you think it worked? Do you think it was good? Do you think people will receive it well? Do you think he cut a good image?
He has, one of the first things you notice about Andy Burnham when he talks is his accent, right? This is a different accent we're used to hearing. And I guess, that is going to kind of resonate for many people and also be something quite fresh for other people too. I think he was also saying at the beginning, I get it, I get how you feel. And I think, in that sense, the humanity of that is, well, yeah, I understand. And not just politics has been broken, we have to do better, he said, but also that sense that, people genuinely, and we see this in our research with Joseph Rowntree Foundation over and over and over, people are very worried about their finances. And I think, coming in with a sense of, I get it, I get the politics isn't working for you, we haven't been good enough. I also get that this is your primary concern. And it is people's primary concern, and it is the thing that's been driving people away from mainstream political parties. And I think, in that sense, there is that kind of, I understand you element to this. I think the other thing, you asked for no political analysis, so
no,
just going to go there a little bit.
I just meant...
I'm not sure that's precisely what...
You said the human side, not the political analysis, right? But I think, on the politics of this, he's also saying, I'm here to stay, right? So the message is, there's been too much instability. Well, the implicit message in that is, I don't want to go anywhere. You might be stuck with me for a very long time. Yeah. And he also talks about the 10-year plan, coming up with a 10-year plan. Now, that really kind of threw me back to the Keir Starmer beginning of his period as Prime Minister, where he kind of came out and said, things have been really bad, they're going to be really bad, and, without that sense of optimism and knowing where we're going. And I think, that 10 years is a long time, but nevertheless, if people can understand that you're taking me, I'm not going to say the word journey, but if you're taking me, with a sense of economic purpose, and you understand what's on my kind of list of concerns, and you understand kind of how I've been feeling about things, then that's a very different kind of mood music. It is saying this is going to take a long time. It's not saying I'm going to change everything tomorrow. So therefore, we also have the homelessness statement, which is a tangible, physical, observable difference, especially in our cities, that people see pretty much every day. So there's some tangible signs there, but there's also this sense that we're on this kind of, a sense of it's going to take some time. He also talked very boldly about a new political and economic model. And what does that mean? And about taking life's essentials into public control. And it's those essentials that people are having to sacrifice for so many people, not being able to, afford to take their kids out and stuff like that, which is for many, many people an essential part of just living an enjoyable kind of fulfilling life. And, so I think that kind of resonance that he's trying to find is bang on, frankly, but also with that honesty about this is going to take 10 years.
I mean, as you can probably tell, there's a bit of a summer cocktail party atmosphere around here as Andy Burnham's supporters mill around in the street and chat, having seen their man into power. Robert, there was candidly, I thought that speech was better than I expected. Not that I had any particular expectations, but I thought it was a well-delivered speech.
But he does speak well. I think
he does speak well. Yeah. But there was more substance in it, I thought. Mm-hmm. But we're still in this position that you alluded to. So, like, rough sleeping, housing, not entirely connected issues, but, one can draw a line between them. It's going to require money. Obviously, housing is to some extent reducing regulation and all the rest of it. But, to some extent, if you want to build a lot of social, what we used to call council housing, then you need to spend some money. That's not Keir Starmer back out. Some of his supporters just outside the front door having a photograph taken. But you talked about the defence plan. That's going to require money. He talked about helping people out with the cost of living. That's going to require money. Where's it all going to come from?
I mean, the honest answer is we don't know. If he is going to put taxes up, as I said earlier, he is going to have to painstakingly build the case for it. But he is massively boxed in by Keir Starmer's manifesto, which says that in respect of the taxes that raise the most amount, income tax, VAT, corporation tax, national insurance, there are pledges in Labour's manifesto not to raise the rates of any of those, and therefore he is broadly left to sort of fiddle around with lesser taxes. Now there is there's huge pressure on him to simplify our tax system. So, for example, one of the things that lots of economists who are close to him want him to do is a land tax, right? Which, however, net probably wouldn't raise an enormous amount of additional money. All that it would do would be to abolish some taxes that are largely regarded as having very negative impacts, like stamp duty, which basically discourages people from moving out of their houses and means that, for example, lots of older people who don't need big houses never sell. It would be rather better for housing supply if we had a different kind of taxation system for the housing market than if you combine the abolition of stamp duty, abolition of some parts of the council tax system with a land tax. Many say that would be a much more rational approach to raising money from property.
Yeah, but I just want to jump in on that because that's a good example. We haven't had a council tax revaluation since, 1991? And we're due to have one in 2030. Every administration after administration delays it because it's an extraordinarily unpopular thing to do because you have to send inspectors round to people's houses or find some means of assessing how people, if someone's built on a kitchen extension or whatever else, then they're going to charge more. It's not a fun thing to do as a government. It's a really difficult thing to do. You're going to cause a lot of aggro. And a land tax, it's impossible to see how you can make a land tax work without bringing forward some kind of revaluation on people's houses. So these are really big, potentially very unpopular
But he talked about a 10-year plan, and that again, I was telling you, we were talking earlier about the other big elements likely to be in a 10-year plan, like reform of welfare and social care. Obviously, that kind of radical reconstruction of the tax system would have to be put in place over a period of a few years. But to get back to your initial question, he hasn't got forever to raise some additional money. One of the reasons why I think it's not impossible that we will get a general election rather earlier than the last possible day, which is, 3 years from now. I think it is theoretically, well, more than theoretically, I think it is possible that we could see a general election, less than a year from now, for the simple reason that as he literally goes through all the challenges properly, now that he is Prime Minister, he may come to the conclusion that, there is very little he can do to start the process of renewal boxed in by that manifesto, which he has said that he will honour. He needs, really, to put, the country on a sustainable path to growth, his own manifesto, his own mandate. And, what he should be doing, I think, in the next, few months is setting out to the British people, the scale of his ambitions and how he's going to achieve them. But he may come to the conclusion that the only way he can actually deliver is to get the approval of the British people in the general election.
Okay, we've got some pictures. He talked about ending rough sleeping. We've got some pictures of Andy Burnham visiting a homeless shelter, which is kind of maybe worth taking a look at. Only in the sense this is an issue he's been passionate about and very interested in and concerned about for a very long period of time. But Jane, it was irresistible to put the idea of an election in a year, question mark. Thoughts on that? Wise politics from Andy Burnham? Unwise politics?
Well,
what will the electorate think if they're told, you could have 2 more years, but we're coming back, 2 years before we need to?
Yeah. So one of the questions that I get asked over and over and over is not by you, but all the time, right? Just about you, is what would the electorate think? You know, that there's this idea that there's a group of people in the country and they just have these views.
You don't know, Jane?
They have these views and politics just responds. But obviously what I think we're going to see is a bit more political leadership, more building a case, I suspect. And that has been, I think, one of the tensions in British politics over recent years, that there has been so much reactionary kind of political decision-making to the public, right? So that's the first thing. It's in a sense, it's like, well, what would the public make of it now? Well, probably like, oh my gosh, you know, but what will the public make of it in a year? Well, that's going to depend on the man inside number 10 Downing Street and how he delivers that message of the necessity of the changes that he's making, and what are the contextual things, you know, what is the context that we find ourselves in. So I think Rob is absolutely right that if he feels boxed in terms of policy terms, then that is one of the things that he might want to do. The other question then is it advantageous? And the argument has been since Keir Starmer won the general election in 2024 is that Labour had this enormous majority. They just couldn't take any risks with it. Now, the fact was that he wasn't able to enjoy the kind of comfort of that majority because so many of his MPs were disillusioned. So in a sense, you know, that was a little bit of a sort of moot point at times. But is it going to be the case that Andy Burnham enjoys a substantial poll lead? Because obviously he doesn't want to call a general election if he's just going to lose power, right? So there has to be a calculation that Labour are ahead. Perhaps the Conservatives even have made some sort of recovery off the back of reform, because remember in 2024 it was the fact that the right vote was split that meant you could win the election on a 34% vote as the Labour Party. But he has to get Labour's polling back to where it was 2 years ago and then some if he's going to feel comfortable. So, you know, clearly that's going to matter because you don't just throw away a majority. But it has to be that meeting of those kind of electoral contexts has to come into alignment with this sense of policy, you know, manoeuvrability. That I think, you know, if those two things do align, then indeed, I don't think it's beyond much doubt, really.
I mean, I suppose the logical way for him to approach it would be to say, right, here's some stuff I can do now. I'm going to do this for the next 2 years because I can, because the manifesto allows me, because there are problems that are immediately soluble. So I'm going to make some progress on rough sleeping. I'm going to make some progress on building more council and social housing. I'm going to make some progress on the cost of living. But for the bigger things, I mean, you know, I want to make these very big changes, and to do that, I need a new mandate. I mean, that would be the logical stuff you can deliver now, and then begin to prepare the case for stuff that's going to... this is a question. It doesn't sound like one. Well, does that seem like a sensible strategy?
Well, he's got to build in, as Jane implies, maximum flexibility into his timetable for going to the electorate. I mean, my own view would be, if there were a very significant Burnham bounce, and if this 10-year plan that he's going to publish later this year, which he just promised he would do, if that looks like a fledgling manifesto, and, you know, he happens to be significantly ahead in the polls, my own view is he'll probably go the country quite quickly.
I mean, I guess the danger with that is that's, you know, you remember when Gordon Brown took over, he flirted with the idea of going to the country, and it turned out to be an absolute disaster, and then he bottled it. But he's not going to repeat that error.
No. I mean, look, I mean, he was...
Although he was briefly that was a possibility.
I mean, well...
Which I thought was
it's a question of what you're saying here. I don't think he will flirt. I think he'll make a decision or not make a decision, as it were. I think, you know, he was in that Brown government that so disastrously mishandled, you know, essentially setting expectations for what was going to happen, right? Which ended up making Gordon Brown look weak. I mean, I think, looking back on it, I think you and I slightly disagree on this, but, you know, my own view is if he had gone early, he probably would have won. But anyway, and I think Burnham, I understand it from talking to people close to him, he's sort of learned that lesson. What you don't do is march people up the hill and then march them down again. That is a disaster, and that way lies oblivion. But I don't think it's impossible. I don't think he's made up his mind to do that. I don't think it's impossible. That really quite early on, if they had a significant lead and he had managed to convey to the country what he stands for and what they can expect, that we would get an early election. Now, my own view is there are some people, believe it or not, who think he could go before Christmas. I don't, for what it's worth. I do think probably the earliest we would see would be next May. But I don't think it's impossible.
I've just got to say, Robin, our very brilliant producer, the man he's hugging there is allegedly Peter Reid. Robin, our fantastic producer here, spotted him earlier in the white jacket, Everton midfielder of times gone past. We like to have a lot of Everton knowledge here in Downing Street on occasions such as this. So that is top football knowledge, which clearly I didn't have. Jane, you got a view on the Everton football team of the 1970s?
No, you'll be glad.
Well, that's where you're going wrong.
But thinking about the early election logic, right? I think one of the things that I keep thinking about is Makerfield. And, you know, I remember being interviewed on
And he took a big risk with Makerfield.
He took a big risk. And I think, you know, I remember people asking me about it ages ago, right? Is this going to happen? Yeah. And people saying, well, there is a route. And so many people ruled that out, right? So many people said, Makerfield, too risky. Reform's vote share in the local elections was like 50%. You know, this is just a kind of a terrible gamble. I didn't think so. That doesn't mean I happen to be right on that occasion, doesn't mean I always am. But I didn't think it was such a big gamble.
Never let it be said, you're always
right.
right.
It was a gamble.
Yeah,
you know, it was a hugely brave electorally, politically thing to do. And I think that gives us a little bit of a sense of the kind of politics. If Andy Burnham senses, you know, for whatever reason, whatever evidence, is that he could indeed outperform expectations, he has shown us already that he has a tendency to do that.
What next, Robert? I mean, we've got a whole day, all of us are standing here, because fairly soon we're going to get cabinet appointments. I mean,
so this is the bit of absolute sort of soap opera, which is, you know, we are going to see careers ended, perhaps temporarily, but, you know, some people,
enemies made.
Some people for whom, you know, their greatest ambition in life was to become a cabinet minister are going to be told sorry, goodbye. You know, you're just going to have to get used to the life of a backbencher again. As you say, in some cases that will create enemies, and it will be, again, a really interesting test of Andy Burnham, the extent to which he is troubled in terms of making his changes by the prospect of sending potential, you know, enemies and troublemakers to the backbenches, as you know, and therefore sort of keeps people in jobs that perhaps he shouldn't do, versus actually thinking, right, I've got this fledgling 10-year plan. You know, I've got these huge priorities, devolving power to the regions, improving living standards, and I'm going to get, you know, the absolute top team. Right now, as I said to you, actually, I think more than once today, I do think the most important decision he's going to make today, or announce today, I assume he's made it already, but the most important announcement...
Let's hope he has, because time is short.
The most important announcement he'll make today is the identity of the Chancellor. Now, for any Prime Minister, that job of Chancellor is by far the most important, because you just don't have the time as Prime Minister to micromanage decisions about public spending and tax. You can share what you want to happen, but in the end, you know, the Chancellor, it's such a powerful job. They have so much independence. And also at a time when we are, among the rich countries, the most vulnerable in respect of how investors see us. And what I mean by that is we have this enormous debt, equivalent to 100% of our national income, our GDP. We are already paying more than £100 billion a year to service that debt. But the really big problem is that of the rich countries, America, Germany, France, Greece, we are seen as the country whose fiscal position is, relatively speaking, the most vulnerable. And so whenever there's a time of economic anxiety, which there is because of Trump's war in Iran, our interest rate, the interest rate that his government pays, goes up more than anybody else's, right? And so the position of the Chancellor on how they're going to manage the public finances is a hugely important one. So in all circumstances, appointing a Chancellor is central. Today, it's even more important. I've been reporting that it's likely, and many people think, particularly within his own party, this is a mistake, that the new Chancellor will be the current Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. Now, the reason people think it's a mistake within the Labour Party is, and more broadly than that, it's not because she's not a very talented politician, which she is, but she knows literally very little about economics, and she's never worked at the Treasury. And, if I look back at the history of the last 40, 50 years, really successful chancellors have an economic vision, and they know how to drive the Treasury, how to manage the Treasury. Now, she may manage the civil servants quite well, but there are some who feel that she simply will not be able to drive the economic agenda sufficiently. And there are already people, I've seen, talked to various MPs this morning who are really anxious about that.
Okay. We are reaching the end, or near the end, of this ITV News special programme, and the lunchtime news with Nina is coming up in just a moment. Sir Keir Starmer bowed out of office after 2 years and 2 weeks in number 10. My work is done, he told cheering supporters. I go with a smile. His last duty, resignation to the King inside Buckingham Palace. Outside, appropriately, they were changing the guard. 40 minutes later, it had changed. Mr. Burnham, the one smiling now. Change too. No lectern behind us here, as Mr. Burnham said he would restore stability. We need to be better, he said, as he and his wife, Marie-France, entered number 10, the transfer of power complete. Mr. Burnham made 2 immediate promises on rough sleeping today and the cost of living tomorrow. His cabinet announcement, as Robert was just talking about there, are yet to come. But for now, from Downing Street, it is good afternoon.
That. This. Yep, we buy those. Cameras. Watches. Clocks. Jewellery. We buy loads. All in one go. Broken, tired, tangled. Send your things. No problemo. We buy, sort and mend loads. Everything we buy gets rehomed. Yep, even that. Vintage cash cow. Just send it. We do the rest.
I'm always doing that because I get the pleasure out of playing, and if I win, all the better. It's great. But then I'm not worried that, I've spent this much or that much, because it's not that kind of site. But just because it's a low stake don't mean you're not going to win big. So, because you don't. So, yeah, it's totally for me.
Do as Lisa. Search for Happy Tiger Bingo. A change from binge watching. Bingo's only 1 click away. Happy Tiger.
Looking for fresh? Well, let's get saucy. It's The Fillings Mutual, where dating and dining find the perfect match. 2 sexy singles are out to win the date of their dreams by making the footlong of hers.
He's got to be fit, and he's got to love sandwiches. I love the double sauce. Oh, do you mind?
There's definitely something between us.
It's a sub.
And it's more to enjoy when you keep it fresh with Subway.
Meet Yoto, the screen-free, ad-free audio player.
Lupus cried Mr. Wonka.
With hundreds of Yoto cards. There's music for jiggling and podcasts for giggling. Stories to get lost in and sleep sounds to drift off with. A world of listening waiting to be discovered.
So who is going to run the factory?
Yoto, endless audio, endless adventure.
Hi, I'm Sean Wallace, the TV quizzer. I take on challenges every day, but my biggest challenge, my weight. But now I've lost 2 stone with Jane Plan. I tried doing it on my own, but always failed. But Jane Plan makes it easy.
Jane Plan is a weight loss plan delivering your calorie-controlled meals to your door. And there's nutritionist support. There's 28 breakfasts, 28 lunches, 28 snacks, there's even chocolate, and 28 delicious dinners, like lasagna. With Jane Plan, there's over 80 meals to choose from. All you have to do is heat and eat. On top of that, it's from just £2.70 a meal. So if you want to lose weight, go straight to janeplan.com or call us now on 0800 612 6844.
Having lost 2 stone in weight and 5 inches off my waist, the meals were delicious and I love the convenience of having them delivered to my home.
I never knew losing weight would be this easy. I'm 2 stone 4 pounds down. I'm even looking forward to wearing bikini this summer. I never thought I'd see that again.
Jane Plan has changed my life. I lost 3 stone in just 6 months. Plus, it's less than my weekly shop. Yes, less than my weekly shop. Go straight to janeplan.com. It's from just £2.70 a meal.
With Jane Plan, I didn't need to live on lettuce leaves. It's proper food with the calories counted for me, designed by nutritionists. And it tastes delicious too. Now I'm 2 stone lighter. My clothes feel more comfortable. I feel more energised, active and healthier. Outsmarting the competition is what I do. Outsmarting my weight, that's down to Jane Plan.
So if you want to lose weight and feel great, go straight to janeplan.com. It's from just £2.70 a meal. Or call us now on 0800 612 6844. That's janeplan.com.